Good morning for day 2 of our commission meeting. Thank you, commissioners, for being here. If you can see, you can't see a wide shot yet, but we are down a few commissioners who've had to go home for a reason or two. And I do want to sort of share that we have power here. Some of our friends out in the field do not have power in our great state of California. So ever the optimist, I'm hopeful that families may have just embraced the evening last night and played a game of cards or something by candlelight. Let's think the best possible solutions for all of us that are struggling with no power. Hopefully it resolves soon. We have few important presentations today, not as long of a day as yesterday, but I'm so proud of the work that we did yesterday. I thought that the conversations were so rich and meaningful and important, and I'm sure all of you felt like I did at the end after Joe's sermon, really, about how we should all be thinking about all of our students as they go through, and that the IEP is just step one, and it's really all about employment. So that was a great way to end the day yesterday. I do want to start our meeting today with a flag salute. Does anybody want to lead us in the flag salute? I didn't ask anyone. Kimberly? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I don't have any other announcements. David, do you want to review the agenda for today? Matt's reminding me about roll call.
My colorful pens out. Michelle Andrews.
Here.
Brown. Summer Harding. Havania Hayes White. Sarah Jocham. April Lopez.
Here.
Mills. Gloria Perez Stewart. Gina Plate. Kayla Rodriguez. Kimberly Salmonson.
Here.
Barbara Schulman. Janine Topalian.
Here.
David Toston.
Here.
Steve Winlock. Mike Infante. So we currently do not have a quorum. We need 2 members to have a quorum at this point.
So moving into a review of our agenda, the first item, item 10 this morning, is an update of the assessment results from the 2018-19 school year. Item 11, we will have the state director's report. Item 12 is the state performance plan and annual performance report provided by Shiloh. It's Shiloh. We all know Shiloh. Then we'll have an activity in the afternoon or right around noon, item 13, the state performance plan indicator and target setting conversation that will help the division in planning going forward. We'll conclude the day with general public comment, as well as an opportunity for commissioners to have input, as well as the public in terms of future agenda items. Before we move into the first item, just a reminder, for everyone, we want to make sure that the meeting is as inclusive as possible, so I'd ask everyone to avoid using acronyms, and if you need to use an acronym, please at least use the reference the first time so everyone can follow along with the conversation. Thank you.
We do need an acronym jar. Wouldn't that be great? Or we'd have to pay $1. That would be really smart. Because even myself, I get embarrassed asking what an acronym is, and because I feel like I should know, and then I sometimes don't know. So I'm sure that we're all really guilty of that.
Sometimes there's an acronym, the same acronym for something else.
Right.
And
right.
as like I have next to me, and they'll scribble down 3 letters. I did that with you, David, and you helped me, so something to consider.
Matt, we do have Sarah. She's on her way over. Does that give us a quorum? Still does not, does it? Okay. All right. Well, moving forward, always my favorite group that comes and presents to us is the assessment update. I feel so privileged every month when I get to be on a conference call with them and hear all the hard work that they're doing. And I just continue to be very appreciative of how much collaboration there is now, and how much they consider the work that we do on this commission as informative to their work. Just really always grateful and very appreciative, especially as I do my own work when I'm a school principal, and I know that there's people at the CDE that are really considering every child that I'm encountering and how we can find the best ways to provide assessments for them that are really meaningful to us as a school and to their families. So thank you again. And I want to introduce Becky Bowers from the Assessment Division, who's going to be coming up, and joining her will be Marianne Arcilla, did I pronounce that correctly? From Educational Testing Service. Yeah, I almost said ETS, and I stopped myself, Educational Testing Service.
Hi, my name is Mao Ving. I work with the Assessment Division, and Becky Bowers will be presenting a little bit later. So Michelle Center apologizes she cannot be here this morning, and we have here Marianne Arcilla will present our presentation with you about our reporting system. And since we just publicly released our data, so we really want to show you the system that it's in, and that you'll be able to access the report. So Marianne will walk us through that. And then Becky Bowers will walk us through the Smarter Content Explorer that you could definitely share with teachers to use later. Okay?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marianne Arcilla. I'm the Executive Director at ETS for the California Assessment for Student Performance in Progress and the English Language Proficiency Assessment for California. And ETS is a statewide contractor to the CDE for administering both of those assessments. I'm happy to join you guys here today and on behalf of the CDE to share some of the results for the 2018-19 administration, and also to show you how you can get to the results and some of the resources that are available to parents. So what I'll do today, and then Becky will come later, is to go over the 2019 score results for CASP. I'll talk a little bit about what is available for reporting later on in fall for LPAC, and I'll walk through the enhanced web reporting site. And then I'll talk about Starting Smarter, the new website for parents, and then Becky Bowers will come to talk about the new Smarter Content Explorer and do a demo of that. So as far as by way of background, I want to talk a little bit about the assessments themselves, so there's a bit of context when I go through the reporting information, the test results. So for CASP, and if you don't mind, I'm going to refer it as CASP. We actually have a suite of assessments that fall under that. There is a Smarter Balanced Summative Assessment for English Language Arts Literacy, or ELA, and Mathematics. We also have the California Science Test, or CAST, the California Alternate Assessments, or CAAs, and we have that for ELA, Mathematics, and Science. And then finally we have the California Spanish Assessment, or CSA. Now, what I'll be talking to you about, or I'll be presenting later, are the just recently released results, which is the Smarter Balanced Summative ELA in Mathematics and the Alternate Assessment for ELA and mathematics. The other assessments, CASE and CSA will be, and CAA for science will be released in winter, later this year. So the primary purpose of the CASP assessment is to assist teachers, administrators, students, and parents in promoting high quality assessments. Since 2015, the assessments, that's when the state transitioned to the online and the new standards, assessing the new standards. And so instead of simply having an assessment that's used for accountability purposes, the CASP is really to help all of us to promote high quality teaching and learning. And so we have CASP is a multifaceted system with different components. And as part of the suite of assessments, we're also, the state is also trying to provide as many tools as possible to the field and to parents to help promote that. As far as the CASP test takers, this table gives you a general idea of who takes what tests. For Smarter Balanced summative assessments for ELA and mathematics, and for the alternate assessments for ELA and mathematics. The grades assessed are grades 3 through 8 and 11. And for CAST and for so that's the California Science Test, as well as for CAA for science, students are tested in grades 5, 8, and once in high school. For the California Spanish assessment, it's an optional assessment. The first 4 that I mentioned are required. CSA, the Spanish assessment, is optional and is available for grades 3 through 8 in high school. For CAA, for the CAAs, ELA, Math, and Science, those are only for those students with IEPs that designate the need for an alternate assessment. Also being reported this later this fall, is the LPAC, and we'll be reporting, or the state will be reporting out the initial LPAC and the summative LPAC. The LPAC is actually 2 tests, and I'll talk about a little bit about the initial LPAC to give some context of that. So for initial LPAC, the target students are those students who are in kindergarten through grade 12, whose primary language is a language other than English. And this is usually, the schools usually find this information from a home language survey. When a student arrives at or is enrolled in a California school, the school has 30 days to administer the initial LPAC. Currently in 2000, or last year, it was paper-based test and was administered for the first time operationally in 2018-19. This school year, 19-20, it will also be a paper test. Next year, next school year, it'll be an online assessment. And so the purpose of the initial LPAC is really to determine whether the student is an English learner or is fluent English proficient. Once a student takes a test and it's scored, and it's scored locally with some tools to assist. Once the school has a score for the student from the initial LPAC, they'll be able to use that to determine whether the student, if the student is an English learner, that they can provide English language development services for that student. If the student is determined to be fluent in English, then they're done with the test and are designated as a fluent English proficient, initially fluent English proficient. Students only have to take the LPAC once when they enter into California school. Now, if let's say the student took the initial LPAC and they're designated to be an English learner, then they are administered the summative LPAC annually, and this is similar to the initial LPAC. Summative LPAC is administered to kindergartner or to English learners in kindergarten through grade 12. The testing window is in what we would call spring, but it's February 1st through May 31st. And the student is administered or takes the LPAC annually until they're designated, redesignated, reclassified. And so the purpose of the summative LPAC is to measure progress, the students' progress towards English language proficiency. It's also used, the test results are used for state and federal accountability. So for the state, that is part of the dashboard. Locally, for the student itself, it's used for placement in the English language development classes or services. And it's also used for reclassification decisions. So a student may be reclassified in one of it's one of the 4 criteria of reclassifying the student to either continue having the English language development services or reclassified as fluent English proficient. So that gives a context of the assessments themselves. Let me talk a little bit now about the CASP results, and I'll talk also about the California Alternate Assessment ELA math results a little bit later. These are the 2 that were just released by the CDE. As of yesterday, actually, Superintendent Thurmond released a press release yesterday on the CDE website and provided a bit more information. And there's been a number of news articles about with reactions to the results. So for Smarter Balance for ELA and Math, since 2015, that's the first operational, performance has continued to improve, just generally across the board, but most notably for grades 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's really good, to see that there's progress. So we're continuing to have progress. In particular, there we see the multi-digit scale score growth, not just 1, 2, 3, but incremental, but multi-digit scale growth in both content areas, ELA and Math, in grades 3, 4, and 5. So significant more progress in the lower grades. One of the things we also have seen is that the performance gaps have narrowed for Hispanic or Latino students and also English learners, particularly EVER ELs, EVER English learners. So at one time in their career, they were designated as an English learner, and also reclassified English proficient students. So there's some good news in what we're seeing in the results. I'll show you this slide and another slide regarding the Smarter Balance summative assessments. So in the new website, the enhanced website, we've created, you'll see what were lovingly called donuts. You might have seen this before in a previous presentation where we showed a preview of the website. So when the user goes into the website and selects an assessment, they'll first see an overall. It'll default to the overall statewide results. And this is what users will see when they go to the public reporting website for the Smarter Balanced summative assessments for ELA and mathematics. One of the things a few things that I'll point out about this, we are matching colors to what they would see in a student score report. It's a bit more visual. When you go to the website, there is actually a little bit of animation to have it a little bit more engaging. And so I'll talk about those a little bit later. So here what we're seeing is for English language arts, over 50% of the students met or exceeded standards. And that's the goal, to have students meet or exceed the standards. For mathematics, we have almost 40% meeting or exceeding the standards. And so this is good news. And for each of these, actually, it's about a 1% increase from the previous year. So again, making progress. I think many of you will be interested in the next slide, which is the Smarter Balanced summative assessments, and these are the results for students with disabilities. This is on the left is ELA, on the right is mathematics. So here what we're seeing is that over 16% met or exceeded the standards, so level 3 and above. And for mathematics, almost 13%, 12.61% met or exceeded the standards. Now with this, what's good about this too is that there is continued growth for ELA. It's it's about a 1.3% increase from last year. For mathematics, it's almost a 1% increase. So it's improving, and so we're continuing to go in the right direction. I'll talk now about the alternate assessment results for ELA and mathematics. This was first operational in 2016, and since then, what we've seen is that the performance has been fairly consistent, meaning that it's been fairly flat with some improvement. Where the exception is in grade 7, where we saw a 5-point increase in both ELA and mathematics. So that's very good to hear, and we're interested in looking more into that. We're also seeing a continued increase in the percent of students at level 3 or above, or sorry, there's only 2 levels, at level 3, which is good, and that's what we want to see. So this slide shows the overall results statewide for all students in CAA, ELA, and math, and this is what they'll see in the public web reporting site. For ELA, almost 16% met the level 3, and for mathematics, it's almost 10%. Now for ELA, I will report that it is about 1.3% decrease from last year. So that's something to take a look at a bit more. And then for mathematics, it's about a 2% increase. So better news on the math side. So I've been talking about the enhanced public web reporting site, and we provided a preview, at least of the tiles, the landing page. So I get to talk a little bit more about it because it's actually live and with all the features and bells and whistles. So it is a single homepage for all CASP and LPAC assessment results. It provides the aggregate test results at a glance. So in addition to the statewide results, users can look at county, district, school, and we also have improved filters for the student groups and school types. And school types means all schools, charter schools, non-charter schools. And that was something that has been asked for quite a bit, is to be able to see charter schools versus non-charter schools. We also have new reports that were added for easier entity comparison. So you'll see in the website, and I'll show some of the screens where you can have an easier time of comparing district to school, district to district, and so on. And that's right on one screen as opposed to having to open multiple screens. And also new are statewide performance trend reports. And I'll talk a little bit about that a bit more and go into a bit more detail about that. That's probably one of the more interesting ones that has been anticipated by folks. And so we'll go over that a little bit more. The website, the public reporting website, is listed here, casp-lpac.ca.gov. And it is available now. It's live, and you could also just get it through the CDE website and then do a search for the results. In the CDE homepage on the press briefings, it should be one of the first press briefings from yesterday, and there's a link within that press briefing. So as I mentioned, the public reporting website is a single home for CASP and LPAC. You'll see the 3 different tiles. Some of you may be familiar with this from previous presentations. We have, and they represent the different content areas and assessments. So the blue tiles here in the leftmost column represent the English, or the tiles for English language arts, literacy, and mathematics, as well as science. In the middle, in the green tiles, we have the alternate assessments. So we have the alternate assessment for English language arts, literacy and mathematics, as well as alternate science. And then in the rightmost column, you'll see the purple tiles for the English language proficiency assessment, as well as the California Spanish assessment. Right now, only these two tiles, the English language arts math and the alternate English language arts math, are live. These other tiles also work, but it'll take you to a page that says coming soon, because those will be available later. So if I were to click on one of these, for example, this one, I'd get to this page here, which has the graphs that I showed you, the charts that I showed you, as well as some other features around it. It defaults to the statewide results for all students, and you will have the ability to look at different summaries as well. So I mentioned that there were new filters for grade and school type. This is a blow up of that section. If you go to the home page, it's this area right here. And so here, with the drop downs are easier to get to, and you'll be able to see the subgroups or the student groups a bit easier. I also mentioned about the school types, the new school types. So we have all schools, charter schools, and non-charter schools. So if you're a school district or you're a parent or a teacher and you want to look at just the charter schools, you could just do that here. This is the expanded example of the expanded filters for the student groups, and they are listed here, and this happens to be the one for the English learners. The different assessments, CASP and LPAC, may have different filters, or will have different filters because of their specific purposes. But generally, you'll see the expanded groups. In this case, there is an expansion of the English language fluency groups, and this is something that has been requested for some time. And so you'll see things like EVER-EL, which is a new category. Originally, it was just 3 or 4 classifications. Now we have the also English learners enrolled fewer than 12 months, more than 12 months, and so on. On the landing page to the right, you'll see quick access tiles for additional reports. I mentioned about the add to compare. We have the school district state comparison tile, change over time tile, and then research files, access to research files. For the school district state comparisons, what this allows you, the user to do is select up to 3 different entities to compare. In this case, it's a school. It asks you to pick a school, a district, a state, and it'll show you an example of. This shows you an example of what the comparison graph would look like. And then this way, if you're, for example, if I'm a parent and I'm looking to see, how my kid's school compares to the district, this is one snapshot of how that looks, as opposed to me trying to go through different pages, which is what was the previous version. All right, so I will move on to the performance trend reports, which are very new for this year. It's the first time that they've been available as actual charts, although in previous years, the comparison reports could be created by the user with the information that is on the public web reporting site. In this case, what the CDE is trying to do is provide just an easier platform to share the information with the public. So the performance trend reports are, the goal of them is to compare performance over time for ethnicity, English language fluency, and disability. This is an example on the right of what just a quick view of one would look like. This is an example. This doesn't have, this is sample data. But I'll actually walk you through an actual performance trend report later on. So to access the performance trend reports, this is also available on the public web reporting site. So on the landing page, there are these menu items up at the top, and one of them is the performance trend report. And it'll take you to another page where you can select the grade level from the drop-down menu. And then once you click on the apply filter, it'll take you to, you'll have the ability to look at the chart. And there's a ability to select on each of the triangles. I know that's tiny, but selecting on the triangles to expand the chart that you want to look at. You could also build your own performance trend reports using the data on the site. This actually has been true for previous years. All the data that we use to build the performance trend reports are readily available on the public reporting website. So in this case, what you want to do is select the assessment you want to do the comparison from the 6 tiles. In this example, it's the Smarter Balanced ELA and Math. And then you use the search bar to get to the school, district, or county that you want to focus on. And then you'll see the detailed view here. What you want to do, so in this case, it's for the sample. Let's say this was a school. This is for the sample school. There's a blue button at the bottom to show more detail that you can click on. And then that'll take you to the details that include all the different student groups and the data that's associated with them. So using the student group drop-down menu, you could choose a reference group. You know, a typical one is white to another ethnic group. So that you select the student group and field. You select the student group, and then the field will be expanded. And in this case is what it, This is the expanding of the table. And then you want to find the mean scale score of the grade or grades of your choice in the table. So in this case, the sample is highlighting one of the grades and the data that's associated with it. And then you do the same with another year, for example, or another entity, and build the report. You do have to build the report on a separate application such as Excel or similar. So let me show you an actual performance trend report. And what I'm showing you, and these are related to the Smarter Balanced ELA and mathematics results, and these are statewide, so they're not a particular entity. The only performance trend reports available this year will be statewide. In the future, the goal is to have the ability to do these comparisons on the public web reporting site directly, as opposed to having the user do it on their own. So right now, this year, or for 2018-19, these are static reports, and these are statewide. They will only be available for Smarter Balanced ELA and Math. And again, in future years, the goal is to have more. So let me just talk a little bit about what you're seeing to orient you to the charts themselves. So a performance trend report, and I'll just take the left side. For the next 3 slides, ELA will be on the left, mathematics will be on the right. But as far as the chart itself, what you will see is on the left, the vertical axis is a scale score for that particular grade and content area. Each grade and content area may have different scale scores. So you'll see the scale score on the vertical axis. You'll see the years, on the assessment years on the horizontal axis. Somewhere in the middle of the chart, you'll see a dashed horizontal line. Let me see if I could blow this up a little. So you'll see a dashed horizontal line right here, and that represents the scale score that is MET standard, level 3. So the goal for the state is to have more students up here in the MET or exceeded, and fewer students down here in levels 1 and 2. The blue line with the circles represents the reference group. In this case, the reference group is students with no disabilities. The line, the green line with the plus signs, is the comparison group, and in this case, it's students with disabilities. The numbers at the top of each of the data points for both lines represent the average scale score for that particular year for that group. So, for example, let me move this up a little. So, for example, in 2019, students with no reported disabilities, their average scale score statewide is 2434. For 2019, for students with disabilities, the average scale score statewide across all grades, 2359. The area in between is shaded gray and represents the difference between the two. The difference is also represented in the circled numbers right above the years. So for 2019, the difference, performance difference between students with disabilities compared to students with no reported disabilities is 75. So there's 75 scale score points in between. Now what's nice about the chart, seeing it this way, is that you can see the trend over time for each group, as well as visually and text or numerically, the difference across each of the years. And then you could also see the comparison of both groups to the goal. So let me, go back here. Now in this particular case, this is grade 3, ELA mathematics. We're seeing here for ELA grade 3 that it is in both groups that they are improving performance over the years. But we're also seeing that there's closing of the gap between the reference group and the comparison group. So students with disabilities compared to students with no reported disabilities, there's a 75 point gap. That's an improvement of 3 points from the previous year, where it was 78. The difference was 78. For mathematics, we also see an improvement, just generally trending upward, which is good to see. And we are seeing a comparison between the two groups from previous year, a 2 point improvement in the difference. So narrowing of that gap. For grade 3, for ELA and math, relatively slow improvement, relatively flat, but again, still showing some improvement between the groups, or a narrowing of the performance. So ELA students with disabilities closed the gap by 2 points from the previous year. For mathematics, also 2 points from the previous year. And then finally, I'll show you grade 11. Grade 11, again, improvements for ELA, where there is a 2 point improvement in the difference, which is good to see. For mathematics, it's relatively flat. In this case, the difference increased by 1 point, 1 scale score point. So that's, but otherwise relatively flat.
A quick question on interpreting the mathematics chart. So the students without disabilities are also below the standard line. Can you?
Right.
no one passed or met the standard?
It's, in this case, the average.
Average, okay.
Yes, it's
Thank
the
you.
average.
Can I ask a question about this chart also? The points, when you say 75 points, what does each point represent? And I'm not an administrator, so I mean, forgive my colleagues if I'm asking a question that everyone knows, but I don't understand. Is it 75%? Is it?
It's the difference in the average scale score points is literally this. So this is the comparison group. The scale score, the average scale score is 2577 for students with no reported disabilities, and it's the difference between that number and the average scale score across the state for students with disabilities, which is 2438. So the 139 difference the 139 difference represents the difference in the average scale score points.
Okay. Okay.
And so it's just telling you the kids who got disability got more questions.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I have one other question because it's with this graph. Do we take into account, or do we have a percentage of those kids that their parents opted out of this test? Because I know there's quite a bit of parents that oftentimes don't feel that their kids should sit down for a certain period of time to take a test that they feel uncomfortable with.
So this is the average. These are the average. So I guess the short answer is yes, in the sense that these are the average scale scores for students with scores.
Do we know how many opted out?
Since the opted out don't have any scores, they're not included in this average.
Thank you.
But if you're talking about participation rate, we're aiming for at least a 95% participation rate in the state, and we're really close to that.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the next thing, unless there's questions on that. We could take questions later too. So let me talk about starting smarter. We provided a preview of this in an earlier ACSE meeting or meeting earlier this year. We have a bit more information now. So starting smarter is a tool for parents and educators, and actually, you know, it is available to the public, so anyone can take a look at it that's curious about it. There is a CASP version and an LPAC version. So for CASP, it's ca.startingsmarter.org. For LPAC, it's lpac.startingsmarter.org. The look and feel is very similar for both programs, for both sites. And you may have noticed that the look and feel is also very similar to the public reporting website, and it's also very similar to the student score reports that the parents get. So it's all very branded and together so that there's a cohesive look and feel. So what is available in the Starting Smarter are guides for understanding the student score reports. There are actually samples of the student score reports available on the site that the parents or users can explore. There's sample test questions and links to additional resources. The sample test questions are pretty exciting in the sense that they're more than the available practice tests or training tests that's available already. They provide additional information. They provide a bit more context. They also provide the correct score. So for me, as a parent, you know, I don't have to guess. I know what it'll tell me what the correct score is and why. And so that's really helpful there. And then there are also links to additional resources. The California PTA, Parent Teacher Association, was very helpful in providing some of those resources that's available on the site. Also, what's really nice is that it's available in English and Spanish. There's a toggle right here that will let you go English Spanish, and so it's a complete translation. And so with that, let me turn it over to Becky Bowers to talk about the Content Explorer.
Hello. Hello, I'm Rebecca Bowers, and I'm happy to present for you a live demo of the Content Explorer from Smarter Balanced. And let's see, so I do need, yeah, I need to put it into Chrome if that's okay, sorry. I will introduce myself though first. I am in the assessment division and in the interim office, and so I've been working on this tool with Smarter Balance for the past year. And Smarter Balance has done a user acceptance testing, and so we've kind of, oh, sorry, thank you.
Really into that. Is this what you needed?
Perfect,
Okay,
yes,
great.
thank you. So as I was saying, I'm with the assessment division and in the interim assessment office. And I've been working on this with Smarter Balanced and their member states. And it's a tool to help educators that basically will support instruction and helps teachers interpret student results, and also assists in planning activities that are aligned to grade level claims, targets, and standards. And it was released last month in September 18th. And it is a free tool that's available to anyone. So you just need the website here. There's no login required. Parents can go on to it. Educators can go on to it. It's a great tool for professional development as well. And so I will dive into it. There's a lot on it, so I'm going to try to get it all wrapped up in about 10 minutes. But so as you can see here, this is the home page. The Smarter Content Explorer logo is in the top left corner, so if you're on any page, you can easily get back to it by clicking there. The Smarter Balanced logo is here, so if you want to jump over to the Smarter Balanced website, you can click there. And everything does open in a brand new window, so if you're like me and you exit out of something, then you don't lose the website and have to remember it again. So this is the home page. This is the tool that you can actually start filtering by grade and content area, but I'm going to wait on that to kind of show you the other functions of the page, so that way when we dive in, you're seeing what we're diving into. So here we have the Explore, which is basically this filtering option, the test development, which you'll see assessment rubrics, accessibility guidelines, all of that we'll look into. And then the support, which will be your Q&As and different terms that teachers might want to be familiar with. And what's great is I did participate in an item review and item writing workshop with Smarter Balanced, and educators across California are invited to do that as well. And this basically takes all of that information when test developers are writing items and puts them all in a nice, easy interface to use here. So when I went there, this was not created, and it was very difficult to pull all those resources in many different windows. And so now this is great. It's at your fingertips, easy to use. So the test development, again, has the guidelines, scoring rubrics, and more. And then down here, we have our terms to know, accessibility, and Q&A. So I'll jump into that in a little different area, but you can see it's all located on the home page. And here, Smarter Balance did include direct links to the sample items website, digital library, and two others that are very helpful for teachers to see what kinds of things are being used in the classroom. And so now I will jump into the test development section. And what's nice is it has this hover bar at the top, so you can see what the page is divided into. And it will stay with you as you progress down the page. So the summative blueprints are at the top. You have it for ELA and math right there at your fingertips, the estimated testing times as well. And as you scroll down, there are many interim assessments available. So if educators are confused about which ones to use, it has a nice overview here of what ICAs are, the interim comprehensive assessments, interim assessment blocks or IABs, and then the focused IABs that have been released this year. All the blueprints for all of these interims are also located here, and there's an interim assessment overview document that, again, I'll show. It opens into a new window, and it's a nice PDF format where you can easily print it for teachers, And it goes over all the different interim assessments that are available, as well as details about them. So you can administer them in a standardized format versus non-standardized, which ones are aligned to certain claims and targets, et cetera, are all located on this document here. And if I exit out, I won't lose my page. I keep scrolling down. This is where test developers basically take all of this into consideration when developing test items. So bias and sensitivity is here, general accessibility. It'll link directly to the Smarter Balance page for accessibility. Style guide, what types of calculators are appropriate for certain test items, all that information is here. Scoring guidelines, I was an ELA teacher for 10 years. I really like having all my rubrics and everything in one location. So this is great. I have ELA full write guidelines, again, rubrics for every writing type, the stimulus specifications, and then as well as the vocabulary, which, again, I'm going to go look at ELA, but if you scroll through, it has all the vocabulary that will be seen on the Smarter Balanced assessment, and it's separated by grade level. So an example I used to see was central idea, and many teachers used main idea, controlling impression, et cetera, and students would see controlling impression, not know what that is, and we don't want them to get stuck with a word like that and be hesitant into, diving into the assessment like they should. So rather than have that barrier in front of them, they can look at, teachers can use these sheets and not be guessing what type of word they're going to be using. So that's available for both ELA and math. And then I'll go back up to the top. The support section has terms to know, which is great because it starts bridging that gap between test developers and the language that teachers are using in the classroom every day. They might not know what stimuli is, what task models are, and so they can easily click here. This is something that Smarter Balance reached out to educators, including myself. I didn't speak that language in the classroom, so this is something that definitely would help me. I know I was more used to using standards, so if I want to start bridging that gap, know what a target is, again, all that information is here. Accessibility information is all provided, easily accessible as well. You have the fact sheet, the UAAG, or Usability, Accessibility, and Accommodations Guidelines. And then this link will take you directly into the Smarter Balanced Accessibility and Accommodations website. Q&A is excellent. If you're not sure what this website is all about, you can click on it, and then it has different scenarios for how you might use it to assist and support your teaching. And then I will go back up to dive in and show you the filtering options. So we'll go back to the main page, or you can hit Explore. And I'm going to dive into 6th grade, and I'm going to choose ELA. I'll select a claim. And if teachers aren't familiar with what a claim is, they can click on the contextual help icons that are provided throughout the website, and it'll show the math and ELA claims listed right there. And I'm going to select research inquiry. Again, I said I was more familiar with standards in the classroom, so if teachers want to start bridging that gap, they can click on standards and search by a standard they are familiar with, which this would relieve that tension for me. And then if they want to start challenging themselves and select a target instead, and I know I want my students to analyze and integrate information, I'll click there. I can see the related standards pop up and start to bridge that gap there. I'll click on results, and I see the resource card with all the pre-selected information. I'll click more. And you have your pre-selected information on the resource card. On the left, you have the different targets. So we selected target 2, but it also shows targets 3 and 4, so you can see that progression there. This is a great function where you can go to the sample items website, but if you're interested in your pre-selected information, this button will take you straight there with all of that already selected for you. So you don't have to go in and start to, open a new page and worry about that. So you can see there's one item that would relate to the criteria we input there. And teachers could easily display this in the classroom and show students how that might be seen on an assessment. And so students who are not familiar, I remember because I administered these assessments, they might say, well, why is this showing up this way? You can get them comfortable with hover text items, etc. So again, test developer language, but this puts it into the hands of teachers, which I wish I would have had, honestly. So I'll exit out of the test items. And then now you have that hover bar at the top again, and everything is separated on the page in that way. So you have the related standards that you had filtered by. Depth of knowledge, since I chose research, there are 3 levels here. Usually you won't have that many levels. And evidence statements, as a teacher, I would have loved to have this. So what are students expected to do based on this criteria? So it explicitly has it here. Students are going to analyze, integrate the information while avoiding plagiarism. So rather than sifting through many resources, everything is easily accessible. And as far as accessibility, this is also catered to my filtered options that I've selected. And so you can see students with physical impairments. There's some considerations for them, as well as those who are visually impaired, etc. So that would be keeping in mind the item type that you're looking at, and it would have the accessibility features that are related there. Stimuli is great for teachers that want to start selecting other pieces of text that might be of more, not of more interest, but of interest to something that they are doing in the classroom already. They have the passage criteria and complexity listed here, and even examples like a diary entry, etc. So you can pull in other texts to use in the classroom that are catered toward this. It works great in a professional learning group for that grade level and content area for the discussion with the teachers. Task models basically have that information I was sharing with you. If you are going, so it has the alignment to the standards, and then if you're thinking of creating distractors and rationales, you can use this information to help you do that. This is another part that I like, is the item stems. So they do have sentences here where you can see how that type of item would be asked on an assessment. So students kind of get a feeling for seeing that verbiage and how a question is asked. I wish I would have had that at my fingertips as well. This is very exciting for me. So if I scroll back to the top, that's pretty much everything. You do have an easy search tool here. So I taught theme a lot. I might type in theme. You have some suggestions down there. If you search by theme, because you're thinking of a standard, you're not quite sure standard or target, you can see the results that show up by grade here. So you have grade 3, 4, etc. And you can dive into one of those resource cards and get that information. Next week, Smarter Balanced is actually going to put in a new function where you can select what you want to show on the page and put it all in a PDF format. And if you don't want the standards for some reason or the task models, you can deselect those and you can print that all out. So you can share that in a PLC or something. So every teacher in the group has that. So I'm excited to see that function added as well. And so that's basically it, something we've been working on. And thank you very much. Do you have any questions or? No.
Probably. I know I do, but can we ask questions about both pieces, or maybe we should have Marion come back up? Does anyone, I won't start. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Sarah?
Mine is more for Marianne. Good morning. As we are looking at the different grade levels, those are kids in that grade that particular year, correct? Yep. Is there any documents that show kind of the same cohort of kids moving through for students with disabilities or without, so that we can track the same students over years and see if those particular students are improving versus just at a grade level?
At this time, there's not anything publicly available. That's certainly something, though, that can be done locally, where because the school districts get back their data with the SSIDs for each student. So that is possible to do.
Okay. I just think that would be really helpful for a district or for to be able to kind of follow the same kids year after year versus, oh, I got a really good group of third graders this year or fourth graders. And sometimes people don't do that on their own, but it's good information. Thank you. Oh,
add something? Well, actually, we do have the changeover time report in the public report, and that's pretty close to looking at the third graders to fourth grade to fifth grade. So I think that is the publicly available report. If you go through the site that Marianne shared earlier, you could use that and track those groups of kids over time.
so you could do change over time just with students with disabilities.
I believe so. You do the filter first, and then you do select a grade. So let's say you select sixth grade and the filter, and then you'll see their results in fourth, fifth, and sixth. It's only 3 years at this point in time, but it is multiple years.
Great. That's what I was looking. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that point, though, I think from a I do this locally, right? I do this at my school and track student by student. But I really think it's important politically for us to be reporting some numbers like that because I'm not happy when I see the numbers for all students. I'm sure that I'm not the only one that feels that way just in terms of global discussions in the state of California. So maybe if we also release information, cohort information, then we're going to be able to, because I bet you're going to see better growth maybe than 1% growth. You know, maybe we could see that the third grader that's now in seventh grade, you know, and average those cohort scores together or something. I mean, it might be worth considering just in terms of state data as we talk about how the state's performing.
Not a question as much as a comment, and I'm, still connecting all the conversations we had yesterday with the morning with early learning, ending the day with Joe around employment, and then the data that we're looking at today. And I understand it's not a cohort, but if you look at that achievement gap at third grade, that's at 75 points between students without disabilities and students with disabilities. Fast forward to the 11th grade, it essentially doubles in math and ELA, and so that achievement gap is growing. And so I just wanted to call that out, when we look at the decrease of inclusive environments at preschool, the first assessment in third grade, there's a 75-point difference. Extrapolate that out over an educational career, and the question Joe asked us yesterday, what will we say to that child in 20 years? The data right now is it's a very unpleasant conversation for us as educators 20 years from now and talking face-to-face with these students around how we supported them and how we prepared them for life. And so I just want to keep calling that out in terms of we really need to, as a state and locally as well, begin looking at the data and trying to understand and unpack how we're getting the results that we're getting.
April?
So thank you. That was a lot of information, good information. I want to ask, do we feel that when the test goes more of a computerized test, are we thinking that we might have more participation and probably see those numbers go up? Because I myself, and I mentioned earlier, many parents that I've talked to in the community over the years in the position I've been in had tended not to take certain tests because they were written and difficult and long. And now I think with it more interactive testing online is going to probably show more information and show increases. Is that what you're thinking on your end?
Of course, as Marianne mentioned earlier, much of the assessments that we have for the Common Core State Standards is really to help inform teaching and learning, right? The assessment, if the teachers are working along with her curriculum, they're also embedding in interim assessments to inform how the students are learning and how to change their instruction over time, then I think that will help with the results. It's about integrating the learning with the assessment. The summative is kind of too late. It's already at the end of the year, right? But it's what we do leading up to it that helps whether students can improve over time.
Thank you.
So this is a question more about the Content Explorer, I think. And, you know, one of the things that we have a tendency to do is provide these great tools. And it's a lot of information. And I kind of look at it like when you're online at looking at YouTube videos, that all of a sudden you realize that 4 or 5 hours has gone by. And that's how I think of this. You could get really stuck down these rabbit holes. And I'm just looking at the teachers going, it's just a lot of stuff for them to do. And they are already, you know, have difficult full jobs that if you don't maybe build this into their professional development time, I think it's a lot to ask educators then to go home at night and spend 3 or 4 hours looking at how they can add a passage to one of their you know, to their curriculum. So I think I'm wondering is there any way to check, and we've had this with a couple of other things, how many people are utilizing it? And we had that with some of the stuff with the CASP that we were looking at, how many people are actually utilizing those tools. You know, there's people who go look at it once, and I think people would get overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed looking at it. There's so much information that I was like, okay, I can't even look at this because it's way too much. And I'm wondering how we can help teachers be able to not be overwhelmed by this and say, oh my gosh, look at all of this information, and to track maybe if this is is this an effective tool for them to use?
We're still working with Smarter right now to make enhancements. This was just pushed out or released last month. And so one of the topics that was brought up was to provide scenarios on how teachers might use this in a short video clip. I know that helped me because you're right. I spent many days just doing what I had to do and didn't have time to look through another resource that was presented. So I am very much for the short video clips of showing, okay, what's one scenario? That's not the only scenario, but how might a teacher use this to help? And so what I think is great is that this currently provides all these resources I wouldn't have time to look at that are already available on the Smarter Balanced website. But how to get to them, why would I look at them, et cetera, was not, I didn't have the time to figure all that out. So right now, this is one step I see as in the right direction, where it's now putting them all in one area. So now the question becomes, how might one use it? So I think having those sample scenarios just so a teacher doesn't have to figure it out on their own, that's one thing we are exploring. And so we hope to add that in the support section. There hopefully will be some links and different videos in there shortly. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other comments or questions? Michelle?
So my initial response was similar to Sarah's. So I just had like a sidebar where it's like, hey, do you want, and then it's like vocabulary sheets. Do you want sample questions? And I just click on that instead of having to figure out what I'm looking for, or even going into the search bar and getting multiple things. I could just see a sidebar. Anything else can stay the same. But I just think something that's almost like a quick, those quick user guides when you get a new appliance and there's the short one and there's the long one, we need to make sure they have access to the short one because that's what people are going to want to use. So.
All right, it's never a good moment when I have a page that looks like this with arrows and 1s and 2s and 3s and boxes and everything. So I'm going to try to wrap it all up to my most cogent points that I want to share. I have evolved, and I'm very appreciative of those of you that come out from the assessment division, and you're really messengers of data, and we end up throwing so many questions at you and ask you to answer things that are really not fair because you're the messengers. And so I understand that the issue is much broader than you, and you're just delivering us data. And I also appreciate that when this whole process started, we went from not really knowing what was happening with our students in terms of data to it can't possibly be done, that we go to this electronic version, to, oh, I guess it can be done. Oh, now we have this. Now what do we do? So I get really discouraged when I see the numbers. I can't lie. I shake my head and not sure where to start when I see those numbers. But the only thing I can think of is, I came to education late. I was 40 years old when I came to education, and I was in business before that. And I know that, in education, we say in special education that goals drive services and data drives instruction and all of that. And I think we're really at the place where data has to drive some change. And we have to start looking at how we are delivering services to students with disabilities in terms of what is most effective. And we all are believers in inclusion for the purpose of those models. And I've personally seen data of IEPs of children that were typically growing, 3-4 months in the course of a year. And when we fully included them and turned to a push-in model, they had 1.5 years growth, So it really is important that we are looking at all students. But this data is telling us that we are going to have to really evaluate how we're doing things across the whole state for all students. And I'm so appreciative of the fact that we have a budget to actually consider. We've been seeing real numbers yesterday, $177 million. So that's not something we ever talked about before. So remember, Betty, it's all about the money, It really is all about the money, because teachers are great people and they would love to serve their students, but they are one person. And the issues that are coming at them are deep and rich and profound. And it really does become all about how we set it up and how many resources we have. So I really appreciate the fact that we now are having conversations surrounded by data, and we're no longer just bombarding you with, it can't be done. And I know that the work is going to drive some really significant change in the next 10 years. So I thank everyone that's put these data points together, and you're all scrambling to try to put resources out into the field for people to use that are meaningful, but then they're too much because we don't have enough time. And these are all really real problems. And so we can't fix what we don't know. So I'm going to remain the optimist that I am, and hopeful as we move forward that we can take all of the good work that you do, and now all of the support that we have from the governor and the legislatures in terms of looking at these issues, and start trying to make some change, because I want the students in California to have better numbers than we're seeing. And I'm sure everybody feels the same. So I hope maybe I wrapped up everyone's frustrations, because I know everyone feels frustrated about it, and able to still say thank you for delivering us this information. And we'll all just keep working really hard, I think. Thank you. We need Joe for the sermon, right? In every area. Okay, are we on? Look at that. We're right on time, and we're just in time for Kristen. Yay. All right, Kristen Wright, our Director of Special Education.
Good morning, commissioners. I thought you've had a great meeting thus far, so nicely done. I just wanted to give you a few updates on things that are happening, things you should know about, and things you may want to think about for future agenda items as we start to roll out some new initiatives and money. And it's nice to have that be on the foundation of a lot of the things you talked about yesterday, and ending with Joe's talk with us, sermon yesterday, about, why are we doing this? What is our job in the whole scheme of things in education, and what is our collective job and yours sitting up here to make sure that students with disabilities are getting what they need to be successful? And as you know, being able to map to employment from a big picture has allowed us a nice conversation to begin with parents starting really early. And we've had some districts who've really started to embrace that. in terms of purposely now bringing together their early childhood teams with their transition teams. And to me, that is a signal that that everyone needs to understand how they're working together to queue up the next set of supports and people that are going to work with the student, and with everyone being on board with the larger vision of a family sustaining wage. And that was nice of Joe to give me credit, but really it's Joe that didn't have to convince me, but I just, it's easy to take the stuff Joe has in his mind and run with it because it's so authentic around, and he's seeing on the tail end the supports that rehab is putting in place for students, but you can only do so much when you have to kind of start from scratch in a lot of situations with really getting students ready to be in the workforce. And so let me just give you a couple of larger highlights. The momentum that has happened over the past few years that you've all been a really important part of is continuing, and the focus on special education is also continuing with as much momentum, if not more than it's had before. And a lot of that is grounded in the integration and the coherency that was called out, early on and in the task force that many of you were a part of. And what I see is our new superintendent and our governor and our legislative policymakers and staff all taking a collective approach to wanting to do their part. And just like what happens for us when we see assessment scores that are less than optimistic, we think about, well, then, what do we need to do about it? Where's the how? So we can all legislate and policy make, but it comes down to supporting the teacher and our leadership in schools. And so we do have some really exciting initiatives and funding that's going out in the next few months, or the RFAs that are going out in the next few months around building the capacity of principals and administrators across education, as well as building the capacity of teachers and paraeducators. And our new state board chair, Linda Darling-Hammond, who was the chair of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, is also in relentless pursuit of making sure that our teaching and workforce is very well supported and very well trained. So we are currently working on 2 large grants that'll be going out at the beginning of December. One is called the EWIG, and that stands for Educator Workforce Investment Grants. And the other one is the California State Leadership Academy, and that's for principals and administrators to get professional development as well. And so the Educator Workforce Investment Grants, the last few years we've sent out a lot of money around teacher residency and trying to get the pipeline queued up. Now the focus is on the existing pipeline and teacher retention, and really making sure that all teachers knew from the new credentials and all those things, as well as the existing teachers, which we know also need support, especially as we're advocating for more inclusion of all students within the general ed environment. So you can look for further information and announcements, and we'll make sure you guys stay apprised of that. It'll go out on that information will go out on our listservs, all our listservs, including yours, to make sure that you're aware. But I think it's around the beginning of December that we will be putting the RFAs out. And the one specifically that we're working on in the special ed division is $5 million that will go for teacher and paraeducator support around areas including inclusive practices. And the difference with these funds are that they go to an institute of higher education or a nonprofit who will develop resources and professional learning for teachers and paraeducators in some prescribed areas in the budget. And that's all under SB 75. And I'm not sure if they talked about that yesterday when I wasn't here, but we can send you out that language so you can see the exact areas. But and then they get extra credit if they partner with a county office of education or more. So so that's one piece. And then the CSLA, the California State Leadership Academy, is a lot more money than that will be going out for many purposes. And we'll make sure to send you that information. I won't go into it in super detail now, but just so you know, there is a recognition that we need to provide more training and support for leaders and teachers and paraeducators. And excited about that funding going out. You may have, for those of you who've been around a while, you may have noticed that we haven't had anyone sitting up here. You remember Scott Kirby, who was the state special school superintendent. He rode off into the sunset to Nevada to live his retirement with his family. But we've been in the process of trying to hire a new superintendent of the state special schools, and that's nearing completion. So hopefully by your next meeting, we'll have someone back representing the deaf community. We have had Gina Willette and her staff come from the School for the Blind over the last few meetings, I think, but we'll be able to have representation representing the unique needs of our individuals in the system who are deaf. And I will also be hiring soon a administrator over all of my focus monitoring units. And so that's also a new opportunity. We'll make sure to introduce that person to you as soon as they're hired. We've also been able to hire, thanks to some funding that we received in the budget, some additional staff. One we just hired last week who has a background and extensive expertise around behavioral supports, around the work that we're doing around restraint and seclusion, to make sure that we develop professional resources and training for the state and an FAQ and other things so that folks know what the law says and where to find the resources around evidence-based practices. So his name's Jeff Kramer. We're excited to welcome him. And then we'll be hiring an EL special ed expert as well to work with our SELPA lead and others around professional learning to make sure we have a liaison around the EL guidelines, which I hope you appreciated seeing a little bit more of yesterday. But I think what we've learned, and I think what schools have learned too, because I've heard a lot of feedback, is that people do a lot better collaboration when they're collaborating around something and not just for the purposes of getting together. And so we've definitely seen that to be true in the department. When we have a common mission, we're given a common mission, that we can create something really remarkable, as well as relationship build with each other. And to that end, we've been tasked with some new collaborations in the budget, and those are with two of our other state agencies. So there are two work group type events that will be occurring over the next year. One is around the IDEA Part C to B transition. That's the early start into special education at 3. And so we've been tasked to join forces with our Department of Developmental Services to identify the barriers to that smooth transition from C to B. That means having an IEP by your 3rd birthday. And so that provides a nice opportunity to revisit those conversations and try to make that more smooth. As we know, it's so critical, that transition, especially as we try to help parents transition and understand how to transition into inclusive environments at 3 and what the rules are there in the law. And then the second one is around Medi-Cal. And so we are in a close partnership now with the Department of Healthcare Services, where we are working with them to ensure that schools and districts are able to maximize their drawdown and their access to 3 different types of Medi-Cal funding. And so we're looking at, and this is all about breaking down barriers and providing better information so that everyone has access to the same level of resources, despite whether you're a rural entity that has 2 people working in your district office or a large district that has 20. And so we'll keep you posted on that. And if there's some opportunities for you all to participate in those, we'd love to have you participate in those. More to come at the next meeting. And a couple other updates. We did, you might hear rumblings that we increased fees for non-public schools and non-public agencies. We have the ability in statute to increase fees based on cost of living increases, and we hadn't done that for more than 10 years. And so we did increase those fees, and those fees actually go directly to cover the monitoring that we do and the certification that we do of all those entities. There's more than 800 non-public agencies and many schools both in and out of state that we certify, and so there's a lot of, we go places and there's travel and a lot of time involved in making sure that we're certifying folks that are able to so our districts are able to use IDEA funds to purchase the services that they need from non-public agencies and schools. And we have been, and you'll experience it more today, we had a state performance plan target setting work group. We're just finishing we just finished our last year of our last set of state performance plan targets, and those are the federal indicators. And you'll be walking through those today with Nora and Shiloh from our staff, who've been working really hard to make sure that we get lots of input and feedback on where people want to see us going in the future. And as you know, those indicators run parallel to our dashboard. And so there's some crossover indicators and some that are like LRE, least restrictive environment, are independent of anything else. And so we continue to work in the special ed division on how to articulate those to help districts not to have to live in two worlds. And so as we're thinking about that, we're really trying to move in the special ed division to one district, one plan for special education, and really have it be part of a continuous improvement process where they see where they are with their indicators, and then that continuous improvement. You've heard of PIR, performance indicator review, that districts go through when they're not meeting a target for the indicators. And then how do those kind of map and cross over with our local control accountability plans, and our new SELPA leads, our self-improvement leads, have been really trying to make those connections for districts and have developed some wonderful resources that you probably want to have them come back in the spring and show you what they've developed. So we've also been holding stakeholder group meetings, and I think Havania might have mentioned it yesterday. She and Gina Plate have been attending significant disproportionality work group meetings to really try to help provide us advice on what we should do around risk ratio, around the whether we're having allowing for reasonable progress for districts to not be held significantly disproportionate if they're making progress. So once we have more of a, so we're basically, they've made some recommendations that will go to the superintendent, and then we'll bring that information back to you, and we'll be sending information out to the field about what that looks like. So with your own advisory commission on special education, every single appointing body currently will be looking at making appointments. And so for those commissioners who are in their first term, I'm sure your appointing bodies probably either reached out to you. If they didn't, you should definitely reach out to them and let them know if you're still interested in serving or not. I did hear from Gloria Perez, whose term is now officially up as of December 31st, and she is not seeking reappointment. Now that she graduated from law school, she's the president of her law school and doing a lot of other things, and she apologizes for not making it here today, but doesn't want to take up the slot because she doesn't think she'll be able to come to all the meetings. So we appreciate her service. But anyway, so in February, there may be some new commissioners here to join you. And so it's always good to take account. I think April mentioned it earlier as you're planning your February meeting that depending on what happens over the next few months, you want to set up a little like grounding, maybe the day before, have some sort of pre thing to get everyone set up for what the expectations are and all that. And we can work with you on that. Also, one thing you may want to consider for your next meeting is having a presentation and getting some information on Perkins and career and technical education. We have a fairly new director of career and technical education here at the department, and he'd be more than happy to come and present. Perkins sort of crosses over in some ways with special education around the workforce things. And, I think it's really important that we make sure that that students with disabilities are well included and articulated within the career pathways, and that we make sure, and you guys have been really good about this, making sure that we have access points, and that all students have access. To that point, you saw in your folders that there's a letter from the U.S. Office of Special Education Programs around clarifying about rehab and education's and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act ability to help cover if students are dual enrolled. And so one of the things we might want to talk about in the future is that transition between and that merging into the community college space and also into the university space. There's a big call to action in California by a number of parents around four-year university options for students with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities who may not be necessarily on a four-year college degree track, but should not be prevented from having the full college experience and residential and all those things. So we have a number of students in California that are at universities outside of California. George Mason is one, having a full experience with their peers. And so we have a sort of a push in a positive way to have Think College be more visible and come to California, which is an entity and movement about how to put together four-year university options. We have some interest across a number of our larger universities to do that. So that may be something that you want to think about and are interested in making some statement about in the future. California just found out that it received a $37 million reading grant a few weeks ago, and we'll be sending out more information on that as it comes up, but we're really excited that that we received that through our educator, what is that division called now? The educator, it used to be professional learning. Anyway, so one of the superintendent's focus areas is reading, and I think that hits close to home for us in special education because it is one of the barriers for our students for sure. There also is still a great deal of focus and attention being paid to dyslexia and other learning disabilities around early identification. And that might be another area that you want to think about having someone come talk about that piece. There'll be an early screener that's being developed. That's an app that came out of the last budget. Yeah, and some of the research around the genetic predisposition for dyslexia and other learning disabilities that pediatricians are going to be starting to look at in terms of early screening also will prompt us in special education to have to work really closely with our general education peers and our school psychologists and others to make sure that special education doesn't become the catch-all, and really that we want to be able to treat reading and other issues so much earlier. And if a student does not need to be identified but can get their needs met, we need to make sure that we give them everything that they can. I see Janine over there. Yeah.
But also, could we work with the pediatricians as well, just as collaboratively as a group?
Yes. And so that is some of the conversation is, and we have a new Surgeon General, Nadine Burke-Harris, that we'll be engaging with as well around this issue. But I think it's exciting, like an all hands on deck approach. And really that's what we're seeing across all the state agencies. So I feel really hopeful about what's happening across the entities that all want to work together. We're talking about integrated data systems, which help to then connect the dots about what's happening with students. And, the dream, Joe talks a lot about one person, one plan. It'd be great to see that starting at birth, and we just start wrapping around that student. And that's really the momentum that I'm seeing and hearing. And it'll be interesting to see how California starts to develop that and puts it into action and what that mechanism is to do that. But I think there's a ton of promise right now around that. I want to give a quick shout out to the SELPA leads. They have been doing a tremendous amount of training per their promise around, that you've had some of them come speak to you, but the SELPA leads in the last budget cycle before this one were given funding to develop materials and trainings to build capacity with other SELPAs, and they are really becoming part of that state system of support where they're working with the geographic leads and the other entities as a part of our state system of support. So they've been doing a great job. They've developed a ton of resources. I think their website goes live either this month or next month, and so we'll make sure that you have that link so you can see all of their resources. But one of the really good ones is the one where they've broken down the federal indicators in a really simple, easy to read format. April, I'd love to hear your feedback about how the lens you look at it through for parents. And to that end, we have been working, and my staff in the division has been working with the family empowerment centers to really bring them closer into the state system of support so that they can be armed with the same information to be able to empower parents. So we're trying to do more around family engagement and around really early giving parents the information that they need in order to advocate for their kids. You heard some yesterday about ADR, alternative dispute resolution. I think that shows and holds a lot of promise for us. And that's one of the areas that that the new RFA that's going out for the $5 million around teacher and paraeducator training, that's one of the areas that has to address. And so I was trying to think about what would they address within that kind of training, and it occurred to me yesterday that if teachers understand that that's an option, and paraeducators, the value of that, that's who's interacting with the parents and can be able to recommend those options and really have a clear idea. So I think it's actually a really good idea, and we'll see how that sort of sifts out. Let's see. I don't want to miss anything. So I also want to give a shout out to my special ed division team. We have around 160 employees that are working tirelessly every day on behalf of students. We have a large complaints and investigations unit that really is working around individual student entitlements. So when someone calls and files a complaint or has questions, they work with parents and families to ensure that the law is being followed, and districts. And then we have our focused monitoring team that works to support districts and schools around all the indicators and around upholding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We're 100% federally funded to do that. And so all of our staff takes it very, very seriously. And we've been doing a lot of school visits, and we're trying to sort of get down in there so that we can make sure that that we are both a technical assistance arm as well as providing support when districts are having difficulties meeting the requirements or under IDEA. Finally, I want to give a shout out to the Special Olympics Unified Sports. You know, they won the Gold Award last year, and I had the opportunity to go out this past week with Matt to visit one of their programs that's over at Sac State. And it's just great to see students out. Again, when you come out around a common purpose, it's easier for magic to happen, and everyone's not just standing around looking at each other. So it was great to see the students and staff there, and they're working with a lot of their recreational therapists to help also give them experiences with all kinds of individuals with disabilities. And so that seems like something that's going well. And then I just want to say thank you for another great year. I know we won't be together until next year, 2020. But I think based on, on all the things that you heard the last few days, there is a lot of promise, but we also need your strong voices to make sure that You guys all come with really wonderful, unique perspectives to make sure it does make a difference when the advisory commission is, and it's not just by the comments you say, that's important too, but when you ask someone to come present, just by the virtue of you asking, the folks come and have to think about how what they're doing does impact students with disabilities. And so it's an intentional focus that they have to have. It's not that they don't have it. It's just that, like all of us, when it's your time to get up and say something, just like I'm saying to you today, you have to actually think through what have we been doing? What is happening and how have we planned for that? And if we didn't, and if I didn't plan for something, I hope you will call me on it, because that's the whole point of you being here, is to give advice. And so thank you for taking the time. I know this is a big chunk of time out of your lives, but just want to know I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. That was a lot of information. My goodness. I did see Shiloh come in, but to give Shiloh a better presentation, how do you guys feel if we took a 5-minute break? I think it feels like it's needed to stretch a little bit so that we can all focus on the important things she has to share. So why don't we adjourn for just a quick 5 minutes and stretch, and then be ready to hear from Shiloh. All right, commissioners, we feel all refreshed, and we have coffee, and we stretched and all that. So we are ready to go for Shiloh's presentation on the annual performance report. Good morning, Shiloh.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you guys so much for being flexible with my schedule. I had wanted to be here yesterday, but as you may or may not know, we are shifting all of our special education data from ACSE, which is no longer operational, to CalPads this year, and it's sort of causing a little bit of some strife. Like, we've been talking about it for 3 years, and then people realized it was a real thing. So I've been really working my presentation skills over the last 6 to 8 weeks. So I was in Orange County yesterday, so I'm glad to be home for sure. So today we're going to be going through the annual performance report. If you looked at the large number of slides and became a little bit concerned, yes, I will be doing what Chris Druin, who, if you knew him back in the day, would call a forced march. We are just going to bulldoze through these. There's a lot of content here, and so I'm going to do my best to get through it, because I do want to allow us some time for you all to break into groups to discuss what we're going to be going through in your February meeting. So it's just sort of like a primer for that process. So I always like to kind of start with like where we are now. And so we are mostly going to be talking about 18-19 data. And so as you can see, since 2005, we've increased the number of students with disabilities, both in K-12 and serving infant, toddlers, and preschools by about 100,000 children. So you can see that number has increased time and time again. If you compare that to the number of students in general education, that number has fluctuated or stayed very flat. So what we're seeing is a very flat student population growth rate, while we're seeing a very large increase in the numbers of students with disabilities. In fact, we're seeing between 15 and 20,000 more students with disabilities identified in just the last few years. So it's big jumps that we've seen just in the last couple of years. So today we're going to be talking about the annual performance report. Just to give you an idea of what this report is for some of our newer commissioners, this is the report that we are required in IDA to submit to the U.S. Department of Education annually. It is one of the requirements of our grant funding. So if we don't submit this, then they are able to withhold our $1.3 billion in federal funds. So it's very important that we submit this. The State Board of Education must approve it, but it must be also receives information and feedback from our stakeholders, including our Advisory Commission on Special Education. So there are 17 indicators. We will not be going through 17 indicators today. We will be going through 16 because we are not submitting indicator 17 until later in the year. I'll come back in February. We'll talk a little bit more about indicator 17. Indicators are either compliance or performance, and there's one indicator that are both. So targets for compliance indicators are set by OSEP, and they're either 0 or 100%. while targets for performance indicators are set in the collaboration with stakeholder groups. One of the things we will be doing is sort of priming you for your February meeting, in which we will be going through the new targets. So this year, 18-19, is the last year of the targets we set in 2013. So starting this year, 19-20, we'll need to have new targets that go through 2024. And so we will be presenting those to you for feedback and approval, and then the formal approval must come from the State Board of Education, which will happen, I believe, in their April or May meeting. So there's a couple places, this is the last year I can use this slide, where the data comes from. So we do get data from our CalPADS, our California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System. And we also get it from CASEMIS, the California Special Education Management Information System. As you know, CASEMIS has been in effect for almost 40 years and was retired on August 9th of this year. So as of August 9th, we will no longer be collecting data through the CASEMIS system. So we thank her for her long run for service to students with disabilities, but it's time to go to retirement. And then we also receive data from the Office of Administrative Hearings. So we are going to be talking about data from the 18-19 school year. There are 3 indicators that we will be talking about today that are what's called lag year indicators, and they will be reported using data from 17-18. So when I get to those, and I'm not going to be talking about every single indicator. That is very painful. And so we are going to be highlighting a number of indicators, but you do have a handout that goes through every single indicator and how we did last year versus this year, if we met the target or not. And so you'll see that they are, we're actually doing, I think, better this year than we had last year. Last year, I brought in a number of indicators that said we didn't meet the target or we got worse. And this year, it seems that we were getting better. So that's a good thing. So I'm going to start with the compliance indicators. There's 5 of them, and I only have, or I'm sorry, there's technically, there's 6 of them. I'm sorry. One of them, 3 of them I do not have data for you today. And so we will work with you all to get some of that information before it goes to the state board, but those indicators, that data for them comes in at the end of November. And so we're not able to have them for you today. But 3 of them I do have data. And so as you'll see, those compliance indicators are the disproportionality indicators, so the suspension and expulsion disproportionality, the disproportionate representation, and the disproportionality by disability. The reason that we don't have that information is because the indicator itself is about non-compliance associated with disproportionality. So a district is identified as disproportionate, and then they go through a process of reviewing files and reviewing procedures and policies to ensure they're in compliance. If they're out of compliance, we count them. The issue is that districts are still going through that process, and so that's why we do not have data for you today. I will tell you, we have never met 0% on this indicator. So I can guarantee you the target met will be no. We've never been at 0%. There's always a district that has one non-compliance. And if you're a district, you have 100,000 students and you have one non-compliance, you're counted. So we always have some level of non-compliance, although it has decreased over the last couple of years.
Fair to say across the nation,
everybody, yeah. If they find districts that are identified as disproportionate. Now, what happens in some places, in some states, is that they do not have districts that are disproportionate because of the calculations that they used. So I'm going to be going over some of the indicators that we did have data for. One of them is indicator 11, and that's typically known as the 60-day timeline. So when a parent comes in and signs a parent consent for assessment for their child, that starts what's known as the 60-day timeline. The LEA has 60 days from that date to hold the IEP meeting to determine eligibility. And so we are required, the target for this is 100%. So 100% of children who were referred and had an assessment for eligibility that year must have their assessments within 60 days. We never meet this indicator, but we always get really close. And so last year we were a little bit closer at 97.8%, and this year we're at 96.2%. This does fluctuate from year to year. There can be things that are sometimes with both in and out of the control of the district that can cause these non-compliances to occur. When we do the federal calculation for these indicators, the only allowable excuses are going to be if the child moved, or if the parent, or if there was a school vacation within for greater than 5 days. Yes.
Natural disasters not taken into consideration?
We do take those into consideration, but it's important that the district identify that. So the district has to let us know that they had a fire or some kind of instance where that occurred. If they don't do that, then it's just counted as a non-compliance. Things that are happened that we do not allow for are things like the school psychologist went on maternity leave. That's not an allowable excuse. Or, they couldn't, they worked with the parent, maybe couldn't get the parent in the time. Those kinds of things are typically excuses that we provide.
How about strikes?
Strikes are not included, unfortunately. Yeah, strikes are not an allowable. So one of the things we do allow for districts to be excused if they have things like a flood or an emergency or like a due process filing, those kinds of things. But we try to limit it because it's not exactly within the scope of the law. Okay, so indicator 12 is what's known as our C to B transition indicator. These are children who were eligible for the Part C transition, Part C program. That's our infant program, and they transition to our preschool program. They are required to transition and have an IEP in place if they're eligible by their 3rd birthday. This indicator, if you've been on the commission a little while, you'll know that this indicator goes up and down, and this is one of the year it has gone down. We went down about 5.5%. And this is always very concerning to us that we have these kind of great leaps and bounds in this indicator. So we put together sort of the 10 years of what this indicator looks like. And as you see, it is quite variable. One of the things that I've spoken about with Kristen and with some of the other folks in our director's office is not necessarily addressing the dips, but addressing the consistency. Because it's not because what happens is this is a much smaller pool of children. So you're only looking at about 10,000, 15,000 children. And then you have to determine they're eligible by their 3rd birthday. So it really comes down to just a few hundred children that cause this range to be so variable. And so sometimes a few children make a big difference. And so what we probably want to work with our folks at the Department of Developmental Services who run the regional programs is ensuring consistency in referrals, and then working with our SELPA folks and our districts to ensure that they're receiving those referrals in a timely manner and processing them as they come in. I will expect we will probably see a little bit of more variability in this data as we move forward with our CASEMIS to CalPADS transition, because this year's the first year infants who are in district programs will be actually enrolled in CalPADS. So it's going to be some transition at this, I think, as well. But I think one of the things we should be working with over time is the consistency in this indicator. I can't tell you why. It probably really goes down to individual district level issues. So that's all I had for the compliance indicators. I do want to go through a few of the performance indicators. These are on your handout. You will see all the performance indicators. They include graduation, dropout, our assessment indicators, suspension, expulsion, education environments, preschool, least restrictive environment, preschool assessment, parent input, post-school outcomes, resolution sessions, and mediation, and our state systemic improvement plan. So I'm not going to force you all to sit through hours and hours of me talking about each individual indicator, but I did pick a few highlights, things that we've done well at and things that we have not done well at. Later, if we want to have a discussion about indicators I did not present today, I'm happy to do that as well. So I did want to talk about graduation because it is sort of a bit of a highlight, although not as much as we would like. We did see an increase in our graduation rate. Keep in mind, this is a lag year data. So this is 17-18 data. But we are seeing from 65% to 66%, an increase in graduation for students with disabilities, which is 1.3%. Still not meeting the target, which I believe is 90%. But we are improving. And so if you've been sort of on the commission or seen this data over the last several years, you've seen our improvement has been something like 0.2%. So to see a 1% increase is actually really good. This is based on a 4-year adjusted cohort rate too. So we may be presenting to you next year the 5-year cohort rate, but we cannot use it for this indicator. It must use the 4-year cohort rate. But we may be publishing the 5-year cohort rate just to show you all the difference, because there are students with disabilities who do take 5 years to graduate, or even 6 years. That's allowable under the law. And so we want to make sure that those students are counted as well. In the past, I've come here and talked about assessment data. I didn't come with the assessment data. We can talk about it if you guys have questions about it. But there's so many indicators, and we were meeting most of them this year. So I just kind of wanted to skip it and kind of go through things that were, I think, a little bit more interesting. So suspension and expulsion this is an interesting indicator because it is very different from the dashboard, even though it's called the same thing. So not to get confused with folks when you talk about the dashboard. But this is 10% of LEAs have rates of suspension expulsion greater than 10 days. So we don't want districts to have a greater rates of suspension expulsion for their students with disabilities. And this is only students who are suspended 10 days or greater than 10 days. So once they hit the 11th day, they're included. But if they were only suspended for 9 or 10 days, they're not included in this calculation. The good news, though, is the last couple of years, we've actually been increasing this indicator. This year, we actually decreased it. So that's really good. We want this indicator to go down. We want fewer districts identifying children and suspending them for greater than 10 days. Now, I will tell you right now that I believe we will see some fluctuations in the suspension data over the next couple of years for students with disabilities, in part because we are including more data around students with disabilities through the CalPAD system, but we're also increasing the way we're collecting data around suspension expulsion, in part to accommodate AB 2657, the restraint and seclusion law, but we're also looking at ensuring that suspension expulsion that occurs at NPS is reported appropriately. So we may see some fluctuation in this data. Indicator 5 is our least restrictive environment indicator. There's 3 parts to this indicator. That's why this slide is very wordy. I will try to be a little bit more clear on this. I'll just kind of briefly go through it. So there's 3 parts of it. There's students who are in the regular classroom greater than 80% of their day. Those are typically like when we call it mainstream students or full inclusion or 100% of the time. They're kind of different ways that people in LEAs describe that group. There's also students who are inside the regular class less than 40% of the day. In the past, even though this is not a vernacular that's used in IDEA, that's been known as students who are in a special day class or who are in a standalone setting at a school site. So they go to a regular school, but they're attending a classroom that is mostly students with disabilities or all students with disabilities. And then there's separate schools or separate facilities. So those are students who are in separate schools, residential facilities, and homebound hospital placements. So what you don't get here is students who are parentally placed in private schools or students who are in correctional facilities. Those students are not counted as part of this indicator. So one of the things that I wanted to show is that we have been increasing very slowly the percent of students who are in a regular day class, greater than 80% of the day, and decreasing the number who are in separate placements and who are inside the regular class less than 40% of the day. It is a very small increase and decrease, though. So it is what you will notice if you look at 10 years of this indicator is that it is pretty flat. We are not seeing the increases that we would hope for over time. I know we've been talking a little bit more about what we can do, and we've been working with the SIP program to sort of push forward this, but the fact of the matter is we are not increasing as much as we would like. The one thing I do want folks to understand, though, is that 1% change in this indicator, so if you change 1%, which we almost got 1% for 5A, that's almost 9,000 students. So that's the number of students in, say, all of San Francisco Unified School District changed their placement. it wasn't in San Francisco, but it's the equivalent of that. So it is a lot of students. So you have to think about scale with the California. 20% would be almost, 200,000 students. So it's a lot of students if you're thinking about it that way. So people want to see these huge increases, but incrementally, those things are hard to do when we're talking about changing placements of IEPs. One of the things that Kristen has talked about in the past, and she may want to elaborate later on it, or now if she wants to, obviously. She's my boss, she can do whatever she wants, is that these things need to start at early childhood, right? So if early childhood is the on-ramp and the ticket in, if we have more inclusive environments in early childhood, in kindergarten environments, those kinds of things, then children are more likely to be in inclusive environments. And you all heard from some folks in Ventura last year who did some really amazing work that showed when students are in more inclusive environments, they do better on their assessments. So there is, I think, a push to want to go forward on this, but these changes may not happen as quickly as we would like. Yes?
Do you have that information with an overlay of eligibility? What area of eligibility?
Oh, by disability?
By disability.
Yes, I do have it in, do we have it in the PowerPoint here? I think we may. We do have the data. I do not have it here, but we can definitely get it. Yes, we did do it as part of our target comparisons, and so we can get that for you. Yeah, it's something we did it with our stakeholder group. But yes, we do have that data. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what it looks like, because I have a lot of stuff swirling around up here, so that one was not readily available. Okay, any other questions about indicator 5 before we move on?
Do we have, I'm sure we do, and that might be what you're talking about, do we have a breakdown of, or do you have a breakdown of what schools are possibly affecting the indicators that you all reach out to give supports so that they, I mean, obviously all of them in the state are affecting these numbers?
Right. So, yeah, that's a great question, actually. Yeah. So what happens is when a district is not meeting the target for the federal indicators, they come to be part of our monitoring process. And so the folks I was talking about earlier, our focus monitoring and technical assistance units, they work with districts who are not meeting the targets. And one of those areas that they do performance indicator review on and then work with districts is around this indicator of least restrictive environment. So if they're not meeting the state target, then they have to do sort of a root cause analysis and make a plan about how they're going to address that particular issue. So yes, we do. And then we have our Supporting Inclusive Practices project that we've scaled across the state that now we have 2 directors for in North and South, Kevin Schaefer and Kristen Brooks, that were mentioned earlier in the meeting, that are working with lots of districts around improvement, as well as districts who are exemplars to help show what it looks like and how other districts might move towards that. So I think that dovetails with the conversations earlier and that Shiloh mentioned about early childhood inclusion and the literally hundreds of millions of dollars that are being leveraged to try to get more inclusive education starting in preschool, both for to give students access to all the great early childhood experiences they can have, and also to help parents and communities start to change mindsets around including kids, especially with more significant disabilities and developmental disabilities.
So there's also 2 other parts to consider. One thing is that we are revamping some of our selection criteria around our monitoring activities, and one of them is our comprehensive review, which is our most intensive activity. It used to be based on a number of activities. I thought this thing was starting to go down on me. I was like, I didn't touch anything. So we've actually began to revamp the selection process for our most intensive activity, and one key factor is going to be this least restricted environment. So we're really going to be looking at districts who are really the worst performing in this indicator, and they will likely be selected based on their performance. The second thing, and I think you were kind of talking a little bit about this, so we work mostly at the district level, but I can tell you we don't look typically at data at the school level, But what we do see is we do see fluctuations between elementary school and middle school and high school often with this. And a lot of times that doesn't often have to do with what's happening with the student. It often has to do with what's happening, say, with the master schedule, or with the way that, you know, suddenly they go into middle school and it's a block schedule, or it's this kind of thing. And so really having districts rethink how they're doing that. So one of the things that Kristen has said in the past is that your IEP should be a ticket in, not a ticket out. And so really having districts rethink that.
Let me just add that you are right on with that, with the block schedule going in. I mean, I'm in that, right in there right now. So that's completely true. It's the schedule. It really comes down to if it works. Yeah.
So one of the things, and this is not related to LRE, but I talk with folks about the 60-day timeline and their data, and I've been talking with CalPADS coordinators all over the state, and they say things like, well, it's really hard to get an SSID for a student who isn't a student yet, or blah, blah. And I said, well, adult processes shouldn't keep kids from getting what they need. So, and so that's, you know, getting an SSID, the block schedule, the master schedule, that's an adult issue, not the student issue. So, so it's kind of rethinking that a little bit. Okay, so any other questions, comments about Indicator 5? People like Indicator 5. Okay, so I'm also going to talk about post-school outcomes because we saw both an increase and a decrease in this area, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. There are 3 parts to Indicator 14. This is our post-school outcomes. These are the students who left school in 17-18, and the LEA and SELPA follow up with them to see how they're doing. And, you know, we have about 35,000 students who leave school, who are over the age of 14, who leave school in a given year, and that districts follow up on. And we're actually collecting data on about 20,000 of them. So it's a greater than 50% in terms of a survey methodology. I know it's not every student, and we've been talking at the directors, with the directors, with our deputy superintendent, with a bunch of folks about connecting the post-school outcomes data with other types of data, like data at the community colleges or data at the Department of, or Employment Development Department. And so I think right now is a really great time to do that. We have a lot of momentum and support from the governor's office to really create integrated data systems. And so I'm excited to see in the next few years what that looks like as we talk about a P20 or a birth to 20 data system, which we do not have now. But what districts do is that they go and they seek out, and they find really innovative, exciting ways that they do this. Like they connect with them on social media. They go like get little hashtags to try and get the kids to like hashtag their like successes in school and things like that. So it's actually really interesting to see them do these things. And so we are seeing an increase in the number of districts who are reporting positive outcomes. And so here's the results for where we had. So we didn't have a huge increase in the number of students who enrolled in post-secondary, but we did increase that number. So it went from 54% last year to 54.8%. What we did see, which was unfortunate, is we saw the number of students who were competitively employed decreased. So while we did increase the number of students who were in post-secondary education, we decreased, because what happens here, in case you didn't know, is it's sort of a rolling indicator. So you take all the students who were in post-secondary, like at community college or in a 4-year college, and then you roll them in with the competitively employed. So if you see something that's the same in A, and then you drop in B, what the drop is from competitively employment. And so, so we did see about a 7% drop in probably the students who are competitively employed. Yeah, 7%. Sorry, it always looks bigger on my computer screen than it looks on a big screen. And then what we did see is we saw a 4% increase in students who are in some type of education and employment. So this is not a why, but my guess is when you see those kinds of decreases and changes in the numbers is that you have some students who are moving from competitive employment just to some other kind of employment, so part-time employment, that kind of thing, which is interesting to see considering the employment market right now. There's a big need to have workers, so it's really interesting to see. We're going to be looking, I think, more closely at this over time, but I just kind of wanted to point that out to you. Yeah. It is, yeah. So these are students who exited in 17-18 and were followed up in 18-19. There tends to be some fluctuation in this data, very similar to indicator 12. It's a small number of students. It's who people can get in the survey. It's like, okay, we didn't work very hard to get people in the survey, or we weren't able to get everyone. So there's that. Absolutely.
So you said kids who are no longer in school after the age of 14. So are you capturing the kids who like left on the CHESP and then maybe is that in that?
Yeah, so students who left on the CHESP, students who got the GED, students who dropped out, students who graduated or who received a certificate of.
Yeah, because those kids just tend to be kind of young, and so they might not necessarily work, and then there might be. So I'm just wondering how many of those would be represented.
So a lot of times students who are on the CHESP and they are young will enroll in a community college program directly after. So you would see them. You may also see them in 14C. So it really depends. What we don't count for this indicator are students who moved, obviously, who they just left the district and went somewhere else.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick acronym explanation.
I have to put $1 in the jar. It's a California High School Proficiency Exam. I think I got it right.
Yeah, so it's another type. So it's similar to the GED. But I think students between 13 and 18 can take it.
It's actually, you have to have finished 10th grade or be in the semester where you'll be finishing 10th grade. So that could be a variety of ages for kids.
My understanding, though, is, and I'm not an expert in that, is unlike the GED, you do not have to drop out to take it. So you're not considered a dropout to take it.
You can pass it and continue on in high school or re-enroll at any time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just wanted to sort of have any time that you all want to talk about any other indicators. So I'm not going to be going over any additional indicators. We're going to be talking about the setting targets piece from here on out. So did anyone else have any questions about indicators? Sure.
Get my button over here. I have a wondering. I'm just trying to figure out what the impact will be, not being a data guru, on 4A, kind of back to suspension and expulsion. And if we're thinking about the sensitivity of that, or if we can have another maybe state conversation about that with SB 419 in effect. I think we're going to see kind of precipitous drops. And I know we're looking at rate regardless. Mm-hmm. But I'm
talking about the underlying data, like around just willful defiance, like the reasons.
Right. And where, are we tracking how and where kids are going to be suspended outside of a willful defiance suspension if that's not available? I'm just trying to think in the future and go, how do we keep the sensitivity? How would we keep the sensitivity of that measure? Because I think we're going to see a precipitous drop in that data just by.
So they can still report that. Mm-hmm. So they could still theoretically do it. Actually, when they had the K3 willful defiance prohibition, I don't remember what law that was a few years ago, we still permit them to submit that data. It's not a fatal error for them. I mean, if they really did it, yes, they're in violation of that statute, but if they really did it, they need to report it to us.
Instead of doing that, they would do something else. So are you talking about how would we measure what
or if we see this dive in data altogether because of this statute, how do we make sure that within that, because this is a greater than 10-day snapshot, right?
But the data, but our dashboard is not.
It is not.
Okay.
And so just to provide a little bit of clarification, one of the things that we're doing for 1920 is that, and so you won't see that next year.
Okay.
Because remember, this is a lag year.
Yeah.
But in 1920, because we changed the structure of the suspension data for CalPADS to accommodate AB 2657, the restraint and seclusion data collection, what we did was we are now able to collect all types of suspension and expulsions with an incident. In the past, you could only report the most severe incident. So let's say you had a 2-day in-school suspension and a 1-day out-of-school suspension. Well, those 2 days of in-school suspension wouldn't have been reported because we only look at the most severe outcome. Right. Now, districts will report all outcomes. So if they had like a 2-day in school, a 2-day out of school, and an expulsion, all three of those events will be reported. So my guess is we'll actually have more events reported and a greater increase. So we will see fluctuations in this data, increasing the fact that we're probably also going to have the NPS piece. So there's more NPSs, although there's a lot of, folks are at there's a lot of confusion around that. So we're working with providing some professional development to both LEAs and NPSs around this data.
Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Any other questions at the APR? Oh, good. It's always good to get you guys at the end, either of a day or a meeting, because then everyone's like, oh, whatever. I'm done with data. Sometimes when people are fresh, it's like, let's dive in. Okay, if you have time to look at the handout, I would do that. We don't have a quorum today. My understanding is to do a vote, and so we will figure out a way to make that happen at a later time. But in the meantime, what I would do is look through this document here, which goes through every indicator and all of the elements for which we have data. And then we will come back at some other time. Reconvene. So one of the things that we have to do, yes. Yeah.
I remember last year there was more extensive data than this, and I think you just mentioned that at the beginning of your conversation, saying that you're focusing. Wasn't there something more about educationally, like the ERICs or the ERMs and more information that we had? I felt like it was a couple of pages. No?
No, we've always provided this.
Are you talking about the report itself?
Maybe it was more of a detailed report, breaking down everything.
Okay.
So I'm wondering where we could get that.
Yeah, we can provide that.
And the indicator the SELPA improvement leads guide on the indicators, I think would be extremely helpful for you guys in this. So, hey, Matt, can you send that out to everyone? The link, I'll send it to you now, to the SELPA improvement leads. And for those online who are watching or in the audience, if you just type into Google SELPA improvement leads, you'll get their website and you can click on their resources, which is their indicator guide, which has one pager starting on page 11 of each individual indicator that will break it down really specifically for you to understand what the calculation is and what it means. And
I, just to kind of give, it's not a shout out, but just something that we're very excited from. So the self-improvement leads have been working with Shape Education, which is a software development I think company, and they have created a very slick looking website for LEAs to be able to dissect their data. Because one of the things that comes in is that districts are like, we're like, you're not meeting the indicator 5 target, and they're like, okay. And so the idea of when folks say we're going to dive deep into data, like what does that mean? What does that look like? And so really giving them the tools to be able to do that. And so having districts be able to log in and even upload their own data so they can see how it would be, how it sort of breaks down is really helpful for them, because most districts don't have data technicians or data analysts, right? They don't have like a professor just hanging out, like, when can you give me some data to look at? Most districts don't have that. And so it's really helping districts provide that support when they need that. So hopefully when they get that set up, I think it should be any time now, they'll have, we'll be able to preview it for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about state targets. So there's two things that I often come here and talk about, and you'll see often in the documents something labeled SPP/APR. And they're actually two separate items. The state performance plan is sort of the document that sets all of our targets for 6 years. And then the annual performance report is the reporting of that target every year. So when I come to you every year, I'm actually giving you the annual performance report, but it's based on our state performance plan. And so we have set targets through 18-19. So the data that I just provided you is the last year of targets that we've set. So now we have to go through a process of setting new targets. And so we've convened a stakeholder group over the last few months. You guys had a representative on that group to walk through targets. It was a really diverse stakeholder group. We are going to bring to you in February some of the targets. We are going to bring to you some of sort of the draft targets. and walk you through that process. But what I wanted to do today is really walk you through the process we went through with our stakeholder group so that you can see what they did and some of the questions they had, and then see the process they went through to begin to provide us input on the targets. Ultimately, the state board sets the targets, but they will use input from our stakeholder group, from our division staff, from you all to make those targets, to set them. So what we're going to do, I'm trying to keep an eye on the time because I don't want to keep anyone from lunch. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 4 indicators. And then we're going to break. And I'm going to have half of you all look at one indicator and half of you all look at another indicator for 15 minutes. Then we'll switch. And you guys will look at another indicator for 15 minutes, and another group will look at another indicator for 15 minutes, and really go through the process of discussion that our stakeholder group went through. So we did ask the commission what indicators they wanted. You all picked. So if you don't like these ones, you want to talk to your colleagues. So indicator 4. Obviously, and I think this is an important one for a lot of folks. And so, again, this measures the discrepancy of students who are suspended greater than 10 days in a school year. It is a lag year data. Let's talk a little bit about the calculation. It is a 2-step calculation. So first, we look at the LEA level, and this is the number of students with disabilities suspended or expelled greater than 10 days divided by all students with disabilities in the LEA. That gives us a rate. And if that rate exceeds the statewide rate of plus 2%, which last year it was 2.75%, the district is flagged. We looked at all the flagged districts and we divide them by all the states meeting the minimum N size requirement. And last year I think it was like 970 districts. So basically, it's 2 calculations, and we get to like one set of numbers. So let's talk about what it's looked like in the last 5 years. So the last 5 years, the target has been 10%. What you will notice is that we started our target way above where we actually were in 2013. And that's just, I was not in charge of this process at the time, but that is where we landed last in 2013. But what we have seen since 2013 is an increase in the number of districts who are showing that they have a higher rate for their students with disabilities who are suspended greater than 10 days. For those of you who are not math inclined, we actually want this rate to go down. We want this to be fewer. I know you're a data person, Kimberly, but for everyone else, I have a colleague who's sitting now, Stacy, who says, "Give it to me in words. I can't handle all these pictures."
Ratted me out like that.
I'm sure you have kindred spirits. So we wanted to compare where we were to other states. And so I picked a number of states that are both similar to us in size, similar to us in geography, similar to us in demographics, and similar to us in political orientation. So you can sort of see some of the sort of comparisons. So as you'll notice, our results have steadily increased. And we compare that to states like Michigan, who has a similar structure to us. They have like an intermediate education agency similar to a SELPA. So that's why we picked them. They're also large. Florida has a very similar demographic to us. And so you will see that they've actually decreased over time, but their rates are very high. New York is similar to us in size and the number of students. And they also have a very similar geography in that they have one very large district that sometimes directs a lot of the state, like we do. I wonder which one that one is. And then you'll see that they sort of are higher as well. Texas is similar to us in size and the number of LEAs. They went down for a period of time, but then they jumped up very large. I don't know why any of these states look this way. I did not dive into with their data managers, but it's sort of a comparison. And then Washington over time we've seen has decreased. They're sort of like the opposite of us, right? So they started tall and then they went down. They are. They're kind of like, you know, keeping all the books on the shelf. Somebody needs to help Florida. Okay, so here's the statewide comparison of targets, right? So if we think about this data here, and you see the result, you know, all the states are kind of lower, around 4% or lower. New York and Florida are sort of an anomaly. You'll see that the targets, though, are set very interestingly. So California has a target of 10%. Whereas Texas has a target of 0%. And people are like, well, how do you get 0%? Well, if you just don't want any of your students to be suspended or expelled greater than 10 days compared to all the other students. So it has to be greater than a statewide rate. We could get to 0%. So, and it's something we should potentially strive for. But most of the other states had targets that went down. Michigan and Florida both had targets. Florida had a very large stepwise target, whereas Michigan had a very incremental target. New York went down, that went up. I'm not sure what happened with their targets there. New York might also be an instance where they set every 2-year targets because I think their legislature potentially meets either every other year. And so that might be an instance where they do that. And then Washington has these sort of slow stepwise target, and then it's sort of the bottom dropped out. But as you can potentially see, none of the states are meeting their targets. And so one of the things that we had talked about with our stakeholder group is for all of our indicators going forward, setting targets, we need to set the targets where we are now, right? So there shouldn't be a situation where we are setting targets higher or lower than we are today as a starting point, right? So my guess is where we are this year in 1920 should be the baseline, the starting point, and then we go forward from there. Or 1819 acts as the starting point, and then we set the targets from there. I can tell you when we move forward is that there was a lot of variation in the discussion that we had with our stakeholder group about this. Some folks were very like, we want 0%. So we were like, no, we need to step it down more. So there was a lot of variation, really depending on you know, what people saw, but everyone agreed that this was a really important indicator. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to go through the same process of explaining the data to you. It'll be really data out in about 20 minutes, but then we'll let you guys split up and chat. So indicator 5, we just talked about that, 5 pieces to the indicator. Now, if you know, students have 4 potential placements that they would be placed on in terms of groups. You have students who are placed less than 40% of the day. You have students who are placed between 40 and 80% of the day, and then you have students who are placed more than 80% of the day or in separate settings. We are not required in the APR or the state performance plan to set a target or report for that light blue group, which is between 40 and 80%. But there are students in there. And the idea is potentially that we would have students in more restrictive placements who over time could be placed in less restrictive placements if provided the supports they needed. So I think it's an important category to have. So I already kind of talked about this, but this indicator is only for children who are ages 6 to 21. And I know that this is a point of contention for LEAs because you have students who are age 5 who are in kindergarten. They are not counted in this indicator. They are counted in the preschool least restrictive environment because this indicator is for ages 6 through 21. So all your 5-year-old kindergartners are actually in indicator 6, which we are not going to be talking about today. But it's the number of children who are served in these settings divided by all the number of children who are ages 6 through 21. The thing I want folks to kind of understand about least restrictive environment is it's not about services. So sometimes the way LEAs calculate this is they think like, okay, you have, there's 20-minute day or something like that. And so 20 minutes of this service and 20 minutes of this service and 20 minutes of this service, take that away, divide it by 120, that's the percent. That's not how it's supposed to be calculated at all. I think most LEAs understand that, but there are still some pockets of folks who do it that way. The way it should be looked at is looking at the student as a whole and saying 2 things. How much time are they spending with access to the general education curriculum, and how much time are they spending with their regular education peers? That's actually in IDEA as a description of a least restrictive environment. It has nothing to do with the minutes of service. So let's talk about students who are in the regular class 80% or more of the day. We did see, so the target is the line, is the, oh, this is a very sensitive little computer. The target, the dotted line is our result, and the straight line is our target. You will see that one of the things we did with a number of our indicators was to take, is for it to be straight for a little time, so this would be kind of stagnant, give folks time to make changes, and then go up. And so that was something that we decided in 2013. What we have seen is it did go down in 2014, but it did increase after that period of time. I will tell you, though, we also did not start at where we were. So we are outperforming our target, but is that realistic in comparison to where we were? So we want to make sure we're not creating false targets, right? Oh, yay, we met a target. Like, you know, sometimes you have like a to-do list and then you wrote down the 3 things you already did so you could check something off. We don't want to be that, right? It's like, I did something today, check. So we don't want that. And I think we've sort of agreed we're going to start where we are. So we had a similar thing, although we started where we were for less than 40% of the day. We kept the target we kept it the same for 3 years, and then we had it go down after that. And so you will see one of the nice things we could see is that the data itself aligned with that. Ooh, this computer is very sensitive. I keep pointing like you can see it. Like you can see me pointing, like, see right there. And then same thing for separate schools, although we did not start where we were in 2013. We started a little bit below that for the target. We started higher than that, and the data was lower than that. You can see we went down for 1 year, and then we've been slowly going down. We do want this one to go down as well. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that when we go down in this one, it should be much more incremental because the percentage is much smaller. It's just a much smaller group of kids. Okay, so we kind of looked at some state and national trends for this. So one thing to keep in mind is that our rates are much lower than other states. So our rate is about 55%. The national rate sits at about 65%. So we as a state are 10% below the statewide average in terms of students who are in a regular class 80% of the day or more. And so if you look at indicator 5A, our result, we are kind of on par with a number of other similar sized states like New York and Washington in terms of our percent of time. We are behind districts like Michigan or states like Michigan and Florida who are seeing higher rates of students who are in regular classrooms. But all the states, interestingly enough, have seen an increase since 2014. Some smaller than others. But one of the things you will notice, and I do like to point this out, is in our larger states, you do not see as big of an increase. So it's very small. New York is a really good example. They're very close to us in size. So in terms of size, it's us, Texas, and then New York. But you'll see those 3 states are pretty flat over time. So very similar things I talked about. 1 percentage point is 8,000 students for us. So where do California districts fall? So we have the number of LEAs who are below the target is smaller, and we have students, the number of LEAs who are above the target. So we do have a number of LEAs, around 60%, who are getting really close to 100. Keep in mind what we call an LEA here in California is also including our charter schools, who tend to have more inclusive environments. So students who are in the regular class less than 40% of the day, we're continuing to push through, so stay with me a few more minutes on this. I know this feels like a forced march on this. Again, we are above the national average. We said about 21% for students who are in a special, what folks typically call a special day class, whereas the rest of the nation is sitting around 11%. So we're 10% above the nationwide rate. We are on par with New York, although we are higher than New York, but all the other states are much lower. So as you can imagine, what happens is while we are very similar to some of the other states in terms of the percentage of students who are in a regular classroom, we are much higher for students who are in the classroom less than 40% of the day, which means if you remember, I had that one light blue area of where students are falling in the middle. Most of our students are not falling in the middle. A lot of these states, their students are likely following in that light blue area, between 40 and 80%.
So when you're comparing those states, I know that different states have different types of diplomas, and we've debated that here before because we have, our standards-based diploma, and then that's it pretty much. And I'm wondering if there's any correlation to having more kids in an inclusive environment because they can be more flexible with the type of diploma track that those children are on. And in California, the pressure's so high for the, the standards-based, and a lot of times A to G diploma that might, encourage people to put students in special day class instruction in core content, still general ed, but separate setting.
I don't have any data on that. We haven't looked kind of closely into that, but it's a really good point that would warrant some further discussion, I think. You guys always leave me here with a list of things that I need to go back and do, so we'll put that on it.
And I was wondering, in those states, the percentages of urban versus suburban versus rural, because I'm thinking about delivery of services and availability of delivery of services. If you're a more rural state, that can become more of a challenge, and so maybe the kids get placed in a different kind of category.
Yeah, so students, so in terms of rural versus urban, the closest is going to be Texas. In terms, they have a lot of very small districts in very rural areas, while they also have very large urban areas and suburban areas. So in terms of that kind of geographically, they're very similar. But as you can see, they have fewer students in those more restrictive settings. Yeah, David.
Having spent some time in Washington, I would add, really rural environments and smaller size LEAs tend to not have some of those self-contained classrooms, and by default end up, having more students than 80% of the time.
Yeah. So it kind of does support some of that conclusion. Okay, I'm going to continue on. So as you can see, again, most districts are falling outside of that, but we do have a high number, about 90 districts who are so a large number of our districts are below this. They're supposed to be below this, but we do have a number of districts who are above this. We even have, 10 or 15 districts who are at 30% of their students with disabilities are in a class less than 40% of the day, which is something obviously we had talked about looking at in terms of our selection for monitoring. And then in separate settings, again, California is in a higher, has a higher percentage than the national average, about 1% greater. One thing to keep in mind with this is, when you look at how we place students in non-public schools, we have one of the highest rates of students placement in non-public schools. So that accounts for a proportion of this as well.
Draw any conclusions about that, or have any reason why?
We haven't looked, I think, really closely into that. I mean, it is an available setting for folks to, a lot of students go to NPS because a lot of other settings haven't been appropriate for them. But in terms of when we go and talk to other states, they're not doing out-of-state placements and things like that. They exist, but they're just not as common. Okay, and then the 5-year result comparison for students in a separate setting, you'll see we are actually lower than a number of states for once, which is where we'd want to be. So New York and Florida and Michigan are all higher than us in this rate, and New York does have quite a higher rate. They have a number of students typically in residential placements. They're also seeing a high number of students in some private school settings, like parentally placed private schools. They aren't typically included in this, but sometimes they are, depending on how they code them. So they have a high number of, it's not non-public school placements, but private placements, the parents have wanted to go to a specific type of school. The LEA has agreed. I think you'll see higher rates of students. And this is something that was brought up to me a couple meetings ago with some, who was I speaking to? I've been in so many presentations, but somebody was talking, it was at our stakeholder group. Somebody was saying that you'll see higher rates of separate placements where you have very highly litigious states. So actually a state like Connecticut has a very high separate school placement because it becomes a way, becomes an agreement between the district and the parents in terms of like a due process filing, things like that. And so we do have a number of those, which can result in a higher number of, and then I was actually reading a thing from Michigan. I was talking with their data manager recently, and they were saying that they're seeing a higher rates of placements, both in special education and in more restrictive settings around children who were exposed to the water crisis because they were exposed to so much mercury. So they're seeing an increase in the number of students who were identified for special education and needing more intensive placements. So they're actually doing an entire university study. So it's really interesting, some of the state-to-state differences. In terms of California, most of our districts are going to fall. They don't put, we have well over 400 districts who are not putting kids in separate settings, but we do have a number where, and you'll see here, it's like 70% of your students are in separate settings. Those might be very, very small districts who have a very few students, and then they're placing them. Okay, in terms of target comparisons, our targets, this is 80% or more. I'm sorry. We didn't do target comparisons. So our targets are lower than the rest of other states when it comes to 80% or the more. They should likely be higher because we should have started where we were, and we will. But one of the things that's interesting to see is even in our larger states, and even in Washington for that matter, the step rate is very small. So states are not expecting to make huge gains year after year on this. They understand that this is really the long game and not the short game in terms of we have to make 20% improvement. It's just not possible to do that in such a short period of time. But what you may want to look at is states like Florida versus states like Michigan, where they have had rates that have gone much more step by step versus a very small increase. Again, our targets are higher for this. They should actually be lower. And so again, same thing with the other discussion that I had, whereas some states have it more stepwise versus more incremental. Those are things that you'll want to think about when you're having your discussions today. And then separate settings. And, and I haven't seen any states, but there could be potentially where you would have a very small percentage, like Washington has their rate set at 1%. I mean, they don't make it, but they set that's the expectation for their state. Okay, and then I'm going to go over 15 and 16 kind of together because that's one of the other indicators we're going to be going. Those are the two other indicators. These are measures the due process hearing went through a resolution sessions and were resolved through resolution session settlement agreements. That is like the hardest tongue twister for someone who's been talking for 45 minutes. Now, we do not report this at the LEA level, so you will not see LEA level data here. But we can set the targets as a range. So this is the percent of written settlement agreements reached through resolution meetings divided by the number of resolution sessions. Over the last 5 years, we have seen our target was set high, which is probably where it should have been, although it did not start where we were at. And then but it has stayed either very flat or gone down. And that is not what we want. We want it to increase over time. We want more of this local resolution sessions happening. So not folks going to due process hearings. Yes.
For this indicator, when we're talking about the resolution session, this is after a due process request has been filed. So yes. That's when the count starts, not anything local.
Yeah. So this is when the due process has been filed. There is a requirement for them to potentially go to resolution sessions. Stacey can also speak a little bit more to that. She's very familiar with that.
So just one of the things that came up when we were talking to our stakeholder group, which is an interesting notion, is we talked about ADR yesterday. So as locals are kind of beefing up their ADR, alternative dispute resolution efforts, one might theorize that you would see the formal resolution session agreements sort of decline, and you would hope that that was because these disputes are being resolved more informally through somewhat like an ADR process. So just a thought, we don't know, but just thought I'd throw that out there.
And if I can I ask another question? So what you're saying is the ADR resolution would happen before the filing ever happened? No? Or you could file and then have the ADR? I just want to make sure I understand.
Or could go ongoing, right?
Yeah, I mean, ADR in general is less formal than when, you enter into sort of the OAH due process. So, if you are a SELPA or an LEA that has ADR dollars or an ADR system or are really good at your informal dispute resolution approaches, as soon as you find out that there's some sort of disagreement with the parent or the family, you would have the tools that you need to settle that informally before they feel like they need to go to OAH and file that due process hearing. Does that make sense?
Right.
So,
yes.
This is just measuring the filings, right?
Right.
So it looks at the filings and the number of those filings who had resolution sessions that had a settlement.
And I do have one other question.
Sure.
Just because of the numbers. So when we say our target is 60%, right? Is that what, okay. So 60% of the filings.
Yeah. So 60%
will get resolved.
So 60% of resolution sessions had written settlement agreements, right? So it's not due process filings, it's resolution sessions. And
yeah, so, go ahead, David.
I think I'm understanding. After there is a filing, there is that mandate that we at least try one more time, see if we blink and cooler heads prevail. We're talking about the rate of times we successfully had that conversation after the filing had been made. Is the settlement agreement, which stops the hearing process.
Right.
But
I guess you have to file that you resolve something. That's what I learned.
Yeah, you have to, so when the LEAs report, so the 15-day there's a 15-day requirement, which indicator 15 hits on in IDEA. And that says that when a parent files for a due process hearing, the LEA has to convene a resolution session within 15 days. And then there's a resolution period of 30 days. And so that's a formal IDEA requirement. If a settlement agreement results from that process, then the LEA reports back to OAH and says, we reached a settlement, and then OAH feeds the data back to us, and that's how we calculate this percentage. So it's
You have a way to measure resolution.
Yeah, through this particular process, that 15-day resolution session process.
But that is not a mandate. The parent can say no, thank you.
Yes, the parent can say, so the mandate is that the LEA has to convene it. But if the parent doesn't want to participate, they can both agree to waive it and move forward to mediation or the due process hearing itself. So yeah, it's not a mandate that it happens. The parent can opt out. It's a mandate that the LEA at least tries. Yeah.
So our resolution session that results in settlement agreements is right around 31%. The national average is around 51%. The one thing that we did keep in mind when we talked about this in our stakeholder group is that we have a lot more due process filings that are occurring in our state than most other states. So we have something like, I think, 1,000 due process filings a year. Texas, in comparison, only has like 200. So it's really different. Yeah. There's a lot of issues there, but I'm talking about when we think about size and comparison, and I think New York also does not have as many. I think they are about half, and they're just about as litigious as we are. And I have those comparisons somewhere. We can always bring them to you. So the state-to-state results comparison, again, these are percentages. You'll see that, and I think I looked at Florida. Florida only had like 100 one year, and it's like, oh, we got 95% of them. Well, you didn't have very many of them, like 1,000 makes a big difference. So we're one of the lower results, and you'll see New York has a very low result as well. So that they've been seeing over time. The target comparisons for just about everyone are kind of like a little bit by a little bit. Texas is a little bit more flat. I will defer to Michelle's previous comment. Yeah, go ahead. Oh. So indicator 16 is the mediation agreement. So that's sort of the next level. You didn't go into resolution. You didn't sort of resolve it through resolution sessions. Now you go to mediation agreement. This measures the percent of mediations held that resulted in mediation agreements. This is not reported at the LEA level, and the targets can also be set as a range. It's the percent of mediation agreements related to due process complaints and mediation agreements, plus mediation agreements not related to due process complaints, divided by the number of mediations held. This one I will tell you is really variable. So it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. Sometimes it's the types of filings that occur that can cause it not to have. Sometimes it's the LEAs, the histories of the LEAs. Like, these really are variable. And you'll see some of these things happen with a number of other indicators that sometimes they're just really variable. The number of filings that occur, same thing with C2B transition, the number of students, same thing with indicator 14, the students they could find, those things can be variable. And we've seen this over the last 5 years. We want more mediation sessions to go up. Where mediation agreements to go up, what we're seeing them is actually go down the last 4 years and then go up the last year. So we almost made our target list in 2017, but it's not that anything happened. It's not that we were doing so great the last 4 years. We are, again, lower than the statewide average, or than the national average. About 71% of these mediation agreements occur versus about 53% of California. State to state results, we are lower than most other states, including Florida and New York. So one of the things that you'll notice, which is interesting, is in the last slide, New York was like itty bitty. They had like no resolution sessions, but they have a lot of mediation agreements. So my guess is that's one of the bigger differences, whereas we don't, ours are like, you know, we have a lower percentage in both. And so you'll see these, but as what I'd like to point out, with the exception of Florida, who has a very small number of these due process filings, is that they're all really variable. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. It's pretty common to see that. But the targets, like for example, they're very high. Ours are probably the lower sets of targets for these last few years than other states that had higher targets. What's interesting to see is Michigan, Texas, and Washington all had very stagnant targets, so they didn't increase over time. They had just, this is the target over those years. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to split you guys sort of down the middle, Summer this way, and that group, and David this way, that group. We're going to spend, I'm over time, of course, but I got to start late, so I hope I get a little bit of credit for that. We're going to take like 10 minutes. And if this side of the room wants to talk about indicator 4, and then this side of the room wants to talk about indicator 5, you guys have the worksheets at your table, and then it'll kind of walk you through the process that we went through with our stakeholder group. And then we will switch, and somebody will take one side will take 15, the other side will take 16. You should have the worksheets at your table. So if you guys kind of want to group up and just have like a group discussion.
13, it's A through D.
Is it purple?
Oh, gotcha.
They're all different colors. They should be black and white. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Do you want to come over here? This group on this side, this group on this side. Work. ready. Yeah. We want to come on back. What? I know. It's so hard to come back. Oh, I'm excited about it. It's okay. It's fine. Go ahead. I mean, it's very important. We're not making votes or anything now anyway.
All right, commissioners, we had a great time chatting about all of Shiloh's information that she shared with us. And so why don't we refer to this group over here, and you can let Shiloh know what you came up with.
So we had indicator 5, and our conversation took a very significant turn. We were thinking about it originally and just being transparent around, okay, if we set it so lofty, what does that do for us locally in terms of the conversations we have to have, how quickly we can turn huge systems on a dime. And then Kimberly evoked the conversation we had yesterday afternoon with Joe around the conversation we want to have with students in 20 years. And based on that, we felt it was important to set the target at about 70% over 6 years.
Yeah, I think that is very similar to what we heard in the stakeholder group. Having sort of an increased, like starting where we are today, but then continuing up with, getting LEAs to be there. And how one of the things we want to think about, and what I would consider if we continue with that target, we still have a lot of discussions to have, I think, is how you all at the commission would support the work that the state is doing, that is going to be coming out of the legislature and things like that around how we get districts there. Because I think districts want to get there. It's just the how that's harder for them.
And we didn't get to the site. That's as far as we got.
That's okay. That's fine. No, I just wanted to kind of introduce you all to the process so you would understand the process we went through when we we kind of walk through the targets in February.
And I think from our group, what we would share, even though we didn't get to both of them, is we would support movement to anywhere that sets us up for a very positive conversation 20 years from now with students.
Yeah.
I propose we call it the Joe target.
The Joe target.
That would be nice. Michelle's going to share out for us, and we only did one too.
That's okay.
So, yeah, we needed to spend some time just discussing why students sometimes actually need to be suspended and the difference between elementary school and high school and the laws around expulsion. So there was just everybody getting on the same page with that. But we were just, laughing at the 10% target. That's just would be shocking in any school that 10% of the students with IEPs would be in the situation, because according to this, it looks like the target is you've been suspended for 10 days or you've been expelled. So that's significant. Yeah. So, of course, we agree with your proposal to start where we're at, which is the 3.67, and then work down incrementally instead of just setting a flat rate. We didn't get really strong on the number we think is appropriate, but I definitely think 1% seems doable. I don't know if that's pie in the sky. I think 0% is impossible, and that's why we had to have that conversation. But when I think about what 1% really looks like and what you need to get to true suspension or expulsion, a suspension at this rate being 10 days, that's significant. So we're thinking that what needs to be done is probably some similar things with your target, like more training for administrators, I think that they're just lacking in that training, and not just on the law, but also on things like antecedent interventions, because things need to happen first, and making sure, I know that in high school, like multi-tiered systems of support, that's not something that's super common. It's knowledge. It's more of an elementary school thing that you hear. So I think things in those kinds of supports kind of lose momentum and kind of get pushed to the wayside when you get to high school, just the nature of the game there. So those kinds of things, increasing those supports for pre-suspension activities that will support better behavior is kind of the rule. Anyway, does that answer the questions that you have?
That's great. Again, one of the,
Add one thing though, to represent Kara, who was from the public and helped us out in understanding that there's a big disparity within districts and LEAs and localities in terms of how this whole issue is addressed, and also depending upon the LEA, who's providing those higher level disciplines. Is it the site administrator? Is it the director of student services? I guess there can just be a wide swing in how some of these decisions are made. So maybe some standardization, or look at standardization between how decisions, especially as you're approaching like 10 days. I mean, I don't get to 3 or 4 days before I start calling somebody. Like I'm at 3 days, I'm at 4. By the time you get to 6, it seems like a whole team of people should be looking at it and, doing everything you can to avoid to get to 10. So maybe that's not the case in every area. So that's something that we might. In high school, that's not the case at all. So, so maybe could be some conversations around that in terms of setting that target rate too.
So thank you, commissioners. I really appreciate the time. I know I took a little bit more time than I was supposed to get, but I think it's important for us to set this as a primer for when we're moving in February, because I'm going to bring you 14 targets. Well, no, that's not true. I will bring you 14 targets. Some of them you won't be able to set. So I'll bring you about 8 targets. And you all will want to know how we have set them, the discussions that we've had, and we'll kind of walk through all of that in February. So I thank you all so much for your time. I will work with Summer to figure out a time that we can reconvene for you all to have a quorum to have a vote around the annual performance report for this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shiloh. It's always nice to see you. Do we have any public comments on this, ma'am? Okay. We're at our general public comment time. Okay.
We have Kara Shikoski from Special Education Administrators of California, county offices.
I have that after the conversation about acronyms. I had it already. So thank you.
County offices.
Good afternoon. I'm responding to the Voices from the Field question about my organization's current priorities. First, I was going to explain the acronym. SECO stands for Special Education Administrators for County Offices. And our organization advocates for effective quality educational programs and services that meet the needs of all students and families and promotes best practices that improve outcomes for students with disabilities. Currently, we're working on the following priorities. The first is addressing greater access to the college and career readiness indicator for our students with more complex learning needs. When we looked at the measures to meet the college and career readiness indicator, we didn't see much of an access point for many of our students. And in case you're not familiar with what those measures are, I'd like to share them very quickly. Career Technical Education Pathway Completion, Grade 11 Smarter Balanced Summative Assessments in ELA and Mathematics, Advanced Placement Exams, International Baccalaureate Exams, College Credit Course, A to G Completion, State Seal of Biliteracy, and Military Science and Leadership. So, thinking positively, what we are working on is exploring the idea that perhaps there are some pathways for our students through the Career Technical Education pathway. Next, we are Communicating and collaborating with SELPAs to identify roles and opportunities to work together. We think that the SELPAs are very valuable, and we need them. Many small and or rural districts depend on SELPAs to provide students with the services that they need. And SELPAs are also an important resource for support and training, especially around the special education accountability systems. We would like to see statutes updated to reflect the role of SELPAs in the new LCFF system. And finally, we're interested in creating greater alignment between the general education, the dashboard, and the myriad of special education accountability systems like DISPRO, PIR, and DINC. We believe accountability must be shared between general education and special education, because decisions that impact special ed accountability are not made solely within special education. We're working to increase communication and collaboration with general education around our special ed accountability measures. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are down to agenda building. So David, that's you.
So we already have a number of suggestions through the course of this meeting. I would remind everyone that we only have about a day and 3/4 time. And so obviously we'll be having Shiloh back. We had all previously had a conversation around YLF presenting at that time to get the word out regarding the summer conference. And so I wanted to share that, but also solicit input around other agenda items.
I had asked or inquired about AB 898 and California Children's Trust maybe coming back and giving an update. I know Kristen brought up, Medi-Cal funding and how important it is for us to maximize that. So any information update we could get from them would be great. And then I apologize for not being here in August. We may have come back to this, but I know we talked about our statewide task force report and maybe considering an update, kind of a where are we now? And I just wasn't sure if we had a discussion about that, but maybe we could have a discussion next time. Thank you.
Probably already there, but the new LCFF. Okay.
I do like the idea of bringing some more of the SELPA leads to talk about the different work, because I think it's really exciting, and the partnerships and the collaboration moving forward, and I think it really dovetails into the work we do.
Other thoughts? Okay, so before I yield the floor, just on behalf of the Mental Health Committee, quick announcement: today's World Mental Health Day. There's still a significant stigma related to mental health. Part of dealing with that stigma is talking about it in open forums and normalizing it. So most of us each year see our dentist and our doctor. We take our cars in every 3 months or 3,000 miles. Yet mental health, we don't talk about it openly. I would encourage everyone to talk about it openly and take care of yourself. We have complex lives and jobs. We do not need to wait until things are very bad. So please take care of your own mental health and support others in doing so. Thank you.
I love that. And I want to thank David. Those of you that don't know, I am relying on David. David's working most of the heavy lifting in creating the agendas, which is such a relief to me. And I think he did an excellent job in this meeting for the last 2 days with Matt, and finding some great presenters for us. And I hope that we get a full quorum next time so that everybody can benefit. I know he's kind of developed a year-long plan, so we have a handle on every meeting for the next year, which is really great. I did want to take a minute before we adjourn the meeting to share with Michelle that in August we thanked and honored Gina for her time as chair, and we all kind of pitched in and we gave her a bocce ball set so that she could spend time with her family and play some bocce ball. It was 40 pounds that she got to carry home on the plane, which was super fun for her, I'm sure. But we also, you weren't here, but we wanted to thank you for your time as being co-chair with her. And thankfully what I chose when I went shopping was not as heavy, so you don't have as much to worry about. So we have a little something for you. At the time that I was shopping, I was reading on Facebook that you were in Africa. So I think that sort of influenced my choice for you, but I'm hoping that in your travels, you'll love this little saddle bag. And inside is a, I know at the time, Time Magazine had a nice issue on mindfulness. So I thought, oh, she's in Africa. She can just carry all her treasures and read about mindfulness. So we really do thank you for the time that you spent as co-chair. And it goes, you know what's really fun about it? It can be whatever, a tote with two handles, but then it's a long short, so it's crossbody thing when you're really trekking out on safari. So, and it's not 40 pounds. Gina had to bring her husband to come and bring that bocce ball set back. Anyway, thank you so much, commissioners. It's been a great couple of days. Our next meeting's in February, so I'll take the time to wish you a really wonderful, warm, and cozy winter season, and be back. Maybe it'll be raining in February. Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you, everybody. Have safe travels home.